A man who has everything: money, power, control, nearly loses it all, because he's forgotten how to live. But when a single mom pulls him into her world of laughter and simple joys, something begins to change. And just when his cold heart starts to thaw, a child's innocent words crack open a truth he never saw coming. But in a world where love collides with scandal and billion-dollar empires crumble, can one man truly choose family over fortune? Or will the life he built in steel and glass cost him the only thing that really matters? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Sterling's penthouse office, casting long shadows across his minimalist desk. The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m., but time meant nothing to him. Success waited for no one. "The Singapore merger needs to happen tonight," Ethan said into his phone, his voice clipped and precise. His free hand danced across his laptop keyboard, numbers and projections flowing onto the screen. "I don't care what time it is there. Wake them up." A dull ache bloomed in his chest. He ignored it, like always. The same pain had been his unwanted companion for weeks now, but he couldn't afford distractions. Not with 3 major deals in play. "No excuses," he continued, loosening his tie slightly. "The Asian markets open in—" The pain suddenly sharpened, stealing his breath. Ethan's hand trembled, and his phone clattered onto his desk. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he gripped the edge of his desk. The room tilted sideways, forcing him to collapse back into his leather chair. His chest felt like it was caught in a vice. "Mr. Sterling?" His assistant's voice crackled through the phone's speaker. "Are you there?" Ethan tried to respond, but could only manage a grunt. His finger found the intercom button on his desk phone. "Sarah," he wheezed to his night secretary. "Get Dr. Matthews, now." The next hour passed in a blur of medical equipment and stern faces. Dr. Matthews, his personal physician for the past decade, performed a battery of tests in Ethan's office, while lecturing him about stress levels and work-life balance concepts Ethan had always dismissed as excuses for mediocrity. "Your blood pressure is through the roof," Dr. Matthews said, removing his stethoscope. "And these chest pains? They're warning signs, Ethan. Your body is screaming at you to stop." Ethan straightened his tie, already reaching for his laptop. "Prescribe whatever you need to. I have calls to Asia in 20 minutes. Dr. Matthews slammed the laptop shut, shocking Ethan into silence. In 15 years, he'd never seen the mild-mannered doctor so forceful. "This isn't negotiable." "Dr. W.W., Matthews said, "you're headed for a major cardiac event if you don't make immediate changes. I'm writing you out of work for the next month, minimum." Ethan barked out a laugh that held no humor. "Impossible. Do you know what's at stake?" "I have." "Your life is at stake," Dr. Matthews cut in. "And I've already contacted your board of directors. They agree with my assessment. You're taking a medical leave starting tomorrow." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. "You went over my head? To my own board?" "Someone had to." "You're killing yourself, Ethan. When was the last time you took a vacation?" Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He genuinely couldn't remember. "Exactly," Dr. Matthews said, scribbling on his prescription pad. "I'm sending you to Lake Horizon. Small town, beautiful scenery, zero stress. My colleague there will monitor you weekly." "Lake what?" Ethan's voice dripped with disdain. "I've never even heard of it." "That's the point. No business centers, no corporate lunches, no deals to chase. Just fresh air, quiet streets, and normal people living normal lives." Ethan slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him as another wave of chest pain hit. "And if I refuse? Then I'll have no choice but to inform the board that you're medically unfit to serve as CEO. Your choice." The next morning, Ethan stood at the private terminal of JFK Airport, watching his pilot run through pre-flight checks on his Gulfstream G650. He'd packed light one suitcase of casual clothes that his assistant had rushed to buy, since his wardrobe consisted almost entirely of suits. "The rental house is fully stocked," Sarah, his assistant, reported efficiently. "Car service will meet you at the local airport. I've arranged for secure internet and phone lines, but Dr. Matthews insists they're only for emergencies." Ethan nodded absently, scrolling through emails on his phone. Sarah cleared her throat. "Sir?" The doctor was very clear about limiting screen time. With a growl of frustration, Ethan pocketed his phone. "This is ridiculous. I'm being treated like a child. You're being treated like someone who matters to people," Sarah said softly. It was such an unexpected comment from his usually professional assistant that Ethan looked up in surprise. "The board doesn't want to lose you, sir. Neither do we." Something tight squeezed in Ethan's chest, and for once, it wasn't physical pain. He covered his discomfort with a brusque nod and turned toward his plane. 1 month, he muttered, climbing the stairs. "How hard can it be?" The pilot greeted him with a cheerful smile that Ethan barely acknowledged. As he sank into his luxury seat, he realized he had no idea what people actually did on vacation. Work had been his entire life since college. His identity, his purpose, his measure of worth. The engines hummed to life, and Ethan watched the Manhattan skyline shrink beneath him. His kingdom of glass and steel disappeared into the distance, and for the first time in decades, Ethan Sterling, the man who controlled everything, felt completely lost. "Lake Horizon," he said to himself, testing the unfamiliar words. "What am I supposed to do there? Feed ducks?" He pulled out his phone one last time, intending to at least review quarterly projections during the flight. The screen remained black. Sarah must have had it deactivated. Of course she did. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the beginning of a stress headache. A month of nothing. A month of wasted time. A month of... what had Dr. Matthews called it? Normal life? "I don't even know how to vacation," he muttered, already dreading every minute ahead of him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his life accumulating wealth most people only dreamed of, and now he was being forced to do what ordinary people saved all year to experience. Somehow, that made it even worse. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Ethan tried to remember the last time he'd done anything just for enjoyment. Nothing came to mind. Perhaps that was exactly why he was on this plane, flying away from everything he understood, toward something he'd forgotten how to do. Live. Chapter 2. Arrival in Willow Creek. Chapter 1. Ethan's Breaking Point. Scene 2. The black Tesla came to a silent stop in front of Cedar Lake Inn, its sleek lines contrasting sharply with the weathered wooden building. Ethan Sterling sat motionless behind the wheel, his hands still gripping it at precisely 10:02. The dashboard clock mocked him. 2:47 p.m. Usually at this hour, he'd be deep in strategy meetings, not wherever this was. He stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes crunching on gravel. The scent of pine needles and fresh lake water assaulted his senses, so different from the filtered air of his penthouse. No car horns. No sirens. No hurried footsteps of assistants bringing him urgent documents to sign, just quiet. "Welcome to Cedar Lake Inn." A cheerful older woman called from the wraparound porch. She wore a floral apron and a warm smile that made Ethan uncomfortable. "I'm Martha. You must be Mr. Sterling." "Correct." Ethan reached for his phone, then remembered his doctor's stern warning. No work calls, no emails. His hand dropped to his side, feeling strangely empty. Martha descended the wooden steps, each board creaking beneath her feet. "Let me show you to your cabin. It's our finest, right on the waterfront." Ethan followed her down a winding path, his wheeled suitcase struggling against the uneven ground. Trees crowded in on both sides, their branches swaying in the afternoon breeze. He counted his steps, a habit that usually helped him feel in control. Today, it wasn't working. "Here we are." Martha gestured to a rustic cabin with a small dock extending into the crystal-clear lake. "Everything you need is inside. Grocery stores just up the road if you want to cook, or the inn serves meals from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Ethan nodded curtly, already missing his personal chef. "Thank you. The Wi-Fi password is on the fridge," Martha added, then paused. "Though between you and me, the connection out here can be a bit temperamental." His jaw tightened. Temperamental? Nature's way of telling us to slow down sometimes. Martha smiled again, handed him the key, and headed back up the path, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. The cabin's interior was clean but basic. Ethan unpacked methodically, hanging his suits in the small closet. He checked his watch. 3:22 p.m. What did people do with all this time? As the afternoon wore on, the silence began to press in on him. He paced the cabin's length, 12 steps each way. He reorganized his toiletries by size, then alphabetically. He read and reread the welcome pamphlet about local attractions until the words blurred together. By early evening, the walls felt like they were closing in. A walk, he muttered to himself. That's what people do here, right? They walk. The lakefront path was well maintained, winding through trees and around gentle curves. Ethan's shoes, definitely not made for hiking, clicked against occasional stones. The setting sun painted the water in shades of orange and pink, colors he usually only saw through his office windows 40 stories up. A sound caught his attention, laughter, bright and clear, carrying across the water. He rounded a bend and stopped, instinctively stepping back into the shadow of a large pine tree. On a small beach ahead, a young woman and a boy were skipping rocks across the lake's surface. The woman's brown hair caught the dying sunlight, and her jeans were rolled up to her calves as she stood ankle-deep in the water. The boy, who couldn't have been more than 8, jumped and clapped as one of his rocks skipped 4 times before sinking. "Did you see that, Mom?" the boy shouted, his voice full of pure joy. 4 skips. Amazing. The woman, his mother, ruffled his hair. "That's a new record. Want to try for 5? Something about the scene made Ethan's chest tighten, and for once, it wasn't stress. The way they moved together, the easy affection between them, the simple pleasure they took in throwing rocks into water, it was so foreign to his world of spreadsheets and shareholders. The boy tried again, but this time, his rock plunked straight down. Instead of frustration, his failure was met with more laughter. "The fish caught that one," his mother said, making the boy giggle harder. Ethan found himself holding his breath, watching their easy interaction. The woman picked up another rock, showed her son how to hold it, guided his arm through the throwing motion. Their heads bent together, sharing secrets of stone skipping that Ethan had never learned. A strange feeling settled over him as he watched, not quite loneliness, though that was part of it. Something deeper, like discovering a room in your house you never knew existed. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that boy, or the last time anyone had looked at him with such open affection as that mother showed her son. The sunset painted them in warm, golden light as they continued their game, unaware of their observer. Ethan stood perfectly still, briefcase forgotten, phone silent in his pocket, watching this small family share a moment that was worth more than any deal he'd ever closed. Chapter 3. The First Encounter. Chapter 2. Arrival in Willow Creek. Scene 2. Morning sunlight sparkled across Cedar Lake, but Ethan Sterling barely noticed the view. He sat ramrod straight on a weathered wooden bench, his Italian suit jacket folded precisely beside him. The coffee cup in his hand was from the local cafe, the Daily Grind. And he'd winced at paying $5 for what was clearly not premium roast. His free hand twitched toward the phone he'd promised his doctor to ignore. Old habits died hard. Instead, he focused on taking measured sips of the bitter coffee, trying to convince himself this enforced idleness wasn't slowly driving him mad. Movement caught his eye. The woman and boy from yesterday were back, walking along the pebbly shore. The boy, who couldn't be more than 8, darted here and there like a sparrow, picking up rocks and showing them to his mother. She wore simple jeans and a blue t-shirt, her brown hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. There was something genuine about them that made Ethan's chest feel tight. The boy noticed him first. "Mom, look! It's the man from yesterday!" He pointed directly at Ethan, making him nearly choke on his coffee. The mother quickly lowered her son's arm, murmuring something about pointing being rude. To Ethan's surprise, instead of hurrying past, she approached his bench with a warm smile. "Good morning. I'm Grace Turner, and this bundle of energy is Max." She gestured to the boy, who was now bouncing on his toes. "We noticed you watching the lake yesterday." Ethan stood automatically, decades of business etiquette kicking in. "Ethan Sterling. I apologize if I made you uncomfortable." Grace's laugh was surprisingly musical. "Not at all. It's just that we know pretty much everyone in Willow Creek. So a new face stands out." She tilted her head. "Especially one in a suit that probably costs more than my car." Ethan glanced down at his attire, suddenly feeling overdressed. "Force of habit," he admitted. Max tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Can I show him my rock collection, please?" "I'm sure Mr. Sterling is busy," Grace began. "Actually," Ethan heard himself say, "I'm not." The words felt foreign in his mouth. When was the last time he'd been able to say that truthfully? Max's face lit up. He scrambled to pull various rocks from his pockets, holding them up one by one. "This one's got sparkles in it, and this one's perfectly smooth, and this one looks like a turtle if you squint." Grace settled onto the bench, patting the space between her and Ethan. "Might as well get comfortable. Max's rock presentations can take a while." Hesitantly, Ethan sat back down. Max wedged himself between them, still chattering about his geological treasures. The boy's enthusiasm was oddly infectious. "So, Mr. Sterling," Grace said over Max's head, "what brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" "Doctor's orders." The words came out more bitter than he'd intended. Apparently, working 16-hour days isn't sustainable. Grace's eyebrows rose. 16 hours? What do you do, run a country? "Just a company." He took another sip of his cooling coffee. "Just a—" Grace shook her head, smiling. "Well, consider this. Your official welcome to doing absolutely nothing important. We specialize in that around here." Max suddenly jumped up. "Mom, can I show Mr. Sterling how to skip rocks? He was watching us do it yesterday." Before Ethan could protest, Grace was nodding. "That's a great idea, honey. I'm sure Mr. Sterling would love to learn." Ethan found himself being tugged to his feet by a surprisingly strong 8-year-old. "I don't think—" "It's easy," Max declared, pressing a flat stone into Ethan's palm. "You just sort of." He demonstrated with his own rock, sending it bouncing across the water's surface 4 times before it sank. Ethan looked at the stone in his hand, then at Grace, who was watching with obvious amusement. "I haven't done anything like this since." He couldn't actually remember when. "Come on," Grace encouraged. "The great thing about skipping rocks is that you can't really mess it up too badly." Feeling oddly self-conscious, Ethan tried to mimic Max's throwing motion. The stone hit the water with a decisive plunk and sank immediately. Max burst into giggles. "That was terrible," the boy exclaimed with delight. "Here, try again. You have to throw it sideways, like this." For the next 15 minutes, Max patiently demonstrated proper rock-skipping technique while Grace offered commentary from the bench. Ethan's throws gradually improved from embarrassing to merely mediocre, but strangely, he found himself minding less and less. "Better." Max cheered when Ethan finally managed to make a stone skip twice. "You're getting it." "High praise from the expert," Grace said, standing to join them at the water's edge. "Max has been perfecting his technique since he could walk." Max beamed at the praise, then bent down to search for another, perfect skipping stone. His face lit up as he found one, but instead of throwing it, he turned to Ethan with shining eyes. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The words hung in the morning air like suspended droplets. Ethan's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, landing with a soft thud in the sand. Grace's face drained of color. Chapter 4. Clarification and Laughter. Chapter 3. The First Encounter. Scene 2. Grace's cheeks flushed a deep red as she quickly placed her hands on Max's shoulders. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry," she stammered, looking mortified. Max has quite an imagination, and he sometimes. She trailed off, clearly searching for the right words. Ethan remained frozen, his coffee cup suspended halfway to his lips. The expensive dark roast suddenly felt cold in his hands. Grace took a deep breath and continued. "Max's father left before he was born. Sometimes Max creates these little stories about daddies he sees around town." She squeezed Max's shoulders gently. "Sweetheart, remember what we talked about? About not saying things like that?" Max's bright smile dimmed slightly. "Sorry, Mommy." He kicked at a small pebble near his feet, his earlier enthusiasm deflating. Something shifted in Ethan's chest, an unfamiliar sensation that made him set down his coffee cup. Without thinking about his expensive suit pants, he lowered himself to one knee on the gravelly path, bringing himself to Max's eye level. "Hey there, Max," Ethan said, his voice gentler than it had been in boardroom meetings just days ago. "That's your name, right?" Max nodded, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Well, I'm Ethan, and while I'm not your daddy, I think it's pretty amazing how good you are at throwing those rocks into the lake. I've been watching you make them bounce across the water. How do you do that?" Max's face lit up again. "It's called skipping rocks." He broke free from his mother's grip and grabbed a flat stone from the ground. "You have to find the flat one, see?" He held it up for Ethan's inspection. "And then you throw it like this," he demonstrated with a flick of his wrist, sending the stone dancing across the water's surface 4 times before it sank. Grace watched the exchange with surprise, her embarrassment slowly fading as she observed this unexpected side of the serious-looking stranger. "That's impressive," Ethan said, and he meant it. He'd never really thought about the simple physics of stone skipping before. "I don't think I've ever tried that." Max's jaw dropped. "Never?" He looked at Ethan as if he'd just admitted to never having eaten ice cream. "But you're so old." "Max," Grace scolded, but there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "I mean, you're a grown-up." Max corrected himself. All grown-ups know how to skip rocks. He began searching the ground intently before presenting Ethan with a smooth, flat stone. "Here, you try." Ethan looked at the stone in his hand, then at Grace, who gave him a small shrug and a smile that seemed to say, "Why not?" Standing up, Ethan brushed off his pants and moved closer to the water's edge. He was acutely aware of how out of place he must look, a man in a $1,000 suit preparing to throw rocks like a child. But Max's eager face made him push aside his usual concerns about appearance and dignity. "Okay, so like this?" Ethan drew his arm back awkwardly, trying to mimic Max's earlier motion. "No, Max giggled. "You have to hold it flat, like this," he demonstrated with another stone. "And then you have to throw it sideways, not up." Ethan adjusted his grip and threw the stone. Instead of skipping across the surface, it made a loud plunk and disappeared immediately into the lake. The splash was impressive enough to send water droplets onto his shoes. Max erupted into laughter, the kind of pure, unrestrained giggling that only children can produce. "That was the worst throw ever," he declared between gasps of laughter. "Even my friend Tommy throws better, and he's only 6. Grace covered her mouth with her hand, clearly trying to hold back her own laughter. "Max, be nice," she managed to say, but her eyes were twinkling. Ethan should have felt embarrassed. In any other situation, such a failure would have irritated him immensely. But something about Max's honest, joyful reaction broke through his usual defenses. He felt a warm sensation in his chest, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. The corner of his mouth twitched, and before he knew it, he was smiling too. "Well," he said, straightening his tie in an exaggerated gesture that made Max laugh even harder, "I suppose I need more practice." "Here!" Max scrambled to find another stone. "Try again! But this time, don't throw it like you're feeding ducks." Ethan accepted the second stone, aware of a strange lightness in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time someone had laughed at him without him feeling insulted or angry. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this. Present in a moment. His second attempt wasn't much better than the first, but Max's continuing giggles made it impossible to care about his lack of skill. The warm feeling in his chest grew stronger, and he recognized it for what it was. Joy. Simple, uncomplex joy, the kind he'd forgotten existed in his world of quarterly reports and hostile takeovers. "Maybe we should show Mr. Sterling the proper technique," Grace suggested, coming to stand beside them. Her earlier embarrassment had completely disappeared, replaced by a warm, amused expression. "What do you think, Max? Should we give him a lesson?" Max nodded enthusiastically, already searching for more stones. "Yes, and then maybe he won't be the worst rock skipper in the whole wide world." Ethan watched the boy scampering along the shoreline, his small hands picking up and discarding stones as he searched for the perfect ones. That warm feeling remained, settling into his chest like an old friend he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Chapter 5. An Invitation to Play. Chapter 4. Clarification and Laughter. Scene 2. The Fairground. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Ethan walked aimlessly through the small town. His polished leather shoes seemed out of place on the worn sidewalks. He'd tried working remotely from his laptop at the inn, but the Wi-Fi was frustratingly slow, and his doctor's stern warning about stress levels kept echoing in his mind. The sound of carnival music and children's laughter drifted through the air. Following it, he found himself at a modest fairground set up in an empty lot. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of cotton candy and popcorn filled the air. "Mr. Sterling!" Max's excited voice cut through the carnival noise. The boy waved enthusiastically from near a game booth, where Grace was helping him aim a water gun at a row of plastic targets. Ethan hesitated, but Max's bright smile drew him closer. "Hello, Max. Miss Turner." He nodded formally at Grace. "Just Grace, please," she said, straightening up. "Fancy seeing you here. I wouldn't have pegged you for a carnival kind of guy." "I'm not," Ethan admitted, adjusting his tie. "I was just walking." "In this heat? In that suit?" Grace raised an eyebrow. She wore a simple sundress that caught the breeze, her hair tied back in a casual ponytail. "You know, they do make clothes that aren't designed for board meetings." Max tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Watch me win!" He squeezed the trigger of the water gun, but his stream went wide, missing all the targets. "Here, try again," the booth operator said kindly, resetting the game. Grace watched Ethan watching Max, and a mischievous glint appeared in her eye. "Say, Mr. Billionaire, think you could do better?" "I don't play games," Ethan said stiffly. "Scared you'll lose?" Grace teased. "Come on. When's the last time you did something just for fun?" Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Max joined in. "Please? You can sit next to me?" Something in Max's hopeful expression made Ethan's protests die in his throat. "I suppose one game wouldn't hurt," he muttered, lowering himself onto the small plastic stool beside Max. "Your tie might get wet," Grace warned with a laugh. Ethan looked down at his silk tie, then slowly removed it and folded it carefully into his pocket. He even unbuttoned his top collar button, earning an approving nod from Grace. "Okay, folks," the operator announced. 3 players, 3 minutes. Hit the most targets, win the prize." The bell rang, and water started spraying. Max giggled as he wildly shot at everything, while Grace showed surprising accuracy. Ethan's first attempts were terrible, his stream of water hitting everything except the targets. "You're thinking too much," Grace called out over the music. "Stop analyzing and just feel it." Ethan wanted to explain that analyzing was what he did best, that it had earned him his fortune, but instead, he took a deep breath and tried to relax his grip on the water gun. To his surprise, his aim improved. "Go, go," Max cheered, bouncing on his stool, even though his own targets remained mostly untouched. The final bell rang, and the operator counted scores. "And we have a winner. The gentleman in the suit." "What?" Ethan blinked in surprise. "You hit the most targets in the last 30 seconds, the operator explained. "Pick your prize." Max's eyes went wide as he stared at the row of stuffed animals. Ethan glanced at Grace, who gave him a subtle nod toward a brown teddy bear wearing a red bow tie. "That one," Ethan pointed. The operator handed him the bear, and Ethan immediately turned to Max. "I believe this belongs to you." Max's face lit up like a sunrise. "Really? For me?" Before Ethan could respond, the boy threw his arms around Ethan's waist in a tight hug. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his hands awkwardly hovering over Max's shoulders. Then, slowly, he patted the boy's back, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Grace watched the scene unfold, noticing how the usually rigid businessman's eyes softened, how his shoulders relaxed, how his smile reached his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. In that moment, she saw past the expensive suit and stern expression to something else, something warm and uncertain and surprisingly gentle. Max pulled back, clutching his new bear. "I'm gonna name him Mr. Sterling," he declared, making Grace laugh out loud. "Well, Mr. Sterling," Grace said, addressing both the bear and the man, I think this calls for ice cream. My treat. Oh, I couldn't let you. Ethan started to reach for his wallet. Nope, Grace cut him off. You won the bear fair and square. Ice cream's on me. Consider it a reward for finally loosening up that tie. Max was already skipping toward the ice cream stand, his new bear bouncing in his arms. Ethan watched him go, that surprised smile still lingering on his face, his tie still tucked away in his pocket, and a few drops of water from the game sparkling on his crisp white shirt. Chapter 6. A Shared Dinner. Chapter 5. An Invitation to Play. Scene 2. Dinner at Grace's. The sun was setting when Grace's old Toyota pulled into the driveway of a small, well-maintained cottage. Neat flower beds lined the walkway, and a worn basketball hoop hung above the garage. Ethan's Mercedes looked distinctly out of place parked behind them. Come on! Max tugged at Ethan's sleeve, practically bouncing with excitement. Mom makes the best spaghetti and meatballs. Ethan hesitated at the front door, feeling strangely uncertain. His usual confident stride faltered as he ducked to enter the low doorframe. The house was tiny compared to his penthouse, but warmth radiated from every corner. Family photos lined the walls, and a collection of Max's artwork covered the refrigerator. I know it's not much, Grace said, catching his glance around the modest kitchen. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly self-conscious. But it's home. It's lovely, Ethan replied, meaning it. The kitchen smelled of garlic and tomatoes, so different from his sterile chrome appliances that had never seen actual cooking. Can I show him my room, Mom? Please? Max was already pulling at Ethan's hand. Grace smiled, stirring the pot on the stove. Give Mr. Sterling a minute to settle in, honey. Why don't you set the table first? I can help, Ethan offered quickly, desperate for something to do with his hands. The billionaire knows how to set a table? Grace teased, her eyes twinkling. Well, Ethan straightened his tie, flustered. I suppose I could learn. Max giggled and pulled open a drawer. The forks go on the left, he explained seriously, handing Ethan 3 mismatched pieces of silverware. Mom says manners matter, even if the forks don't match. Ethan found himself smiling as Max guided him through the proper placement of each item. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, even when correcting Ethan's placement of the napkins. Perfect, Max declared once they finished. Now, can I show him my room? Grace laughed from the stove. Go ahead, dinner's still got 10 minutes. Max's room was exactly what a little boy's room should be, Ethan thought. Model airplanes hung from the ceiling, superhero posters covered the walls, and a small keyboard sat in the corner. Books were stacked everywhere, some well-worn favorites and others clearly from the library. Do you play? Ethan asked, nodding toward the keyboard. Mom's teaching me. Max sat down and played a simple melody. His small fingers moved carefully over the keys, his face scrunched in concentration. I'm learning Heart and Soul. Do you know it? Ethan's throat tightened unexpectedly. My mother taught me that one a long time ago. You play piano? Max's eyes lit up. Play with me. Before Ethan could protest, he found himself squeezed onto the small piano bench beside Max. His expensive suit felt ridiculous as he hunched over the keyboard, but Max's eager expression made it impossible to refuse. Dinner's ready, Grace called from downstairs. Just one try? Max pleaded. Please? Ethan's fingers found the familiar notes, and soon the simple duet filled the room. Max beamed as they played together, his part occasionally stumbling but never stopping. When they finished, the boy threw his arms around Ethan's waist in a quick hug before racing downstairs. Ethan followed more slowly, his heart doing strange things in his chest. The kitchen table was nothing like the formal dining rooms he was used to. Steam rose from a large bowl of pasta, and the garlic bread was slightly burned on one edge. Grace served generous portions while Max chattered about his piano lessons and his upcoming school play. Would you like some wine? Grace offered, pulling out a modest bottle. It's nothing fancy, but it goes well with pasta. Thank you, Ethan said, watching as she poured it into a juice glass. Apparently the only wine glass in the house. Surprisingly, he didn't mind. The spaghetti was better than any 5-star restaurant he'd ever visited. Or maybe it was the company that made it taste so good. Max told jokes that made no sense, but somehow had them all laughing anyway. Grace shared stories about her job at the library and her weekend catering work, her eyes bright with pride in her independence. "More bread?" she offered, and Ethan realized he'd cleaned his plate without thinking about calories or proper dining etiquette once. "Yes, please," he said, then added, "This is wonderful, Grace. Thank you." She blushed, slightly. "It's just spaghetti." "It's more than that," he said quietly, watching Max demonstrate how to twirl pasta with a spoon. After dinner, Max insisted on showing Ethan his collection of rocks from the lake. Grace packed away leftovers, humming softly as she worked. The kitchen clock ticked past 8, then 8:30, but Ethan felt no urge to check his phone or email. "Bath time, mister?" Grace announced finally. "Say goodnight to Mr. Sterling. Can't he stay longer?" Max's lower lip trembled slightly. "We didn't even play Go Fish." "Another time, perhaps," Ethan found himself saying, surprised by how much he meant it. "If your mother doesn't mind." "We'd like that," Grace said softly. "Wouldn't we, Max?" Max hugged Ethan's legs tightly. "Promise you'll come back?" "I promise," Ethan said, ruffling the boy's hair gently. Grace walked him to the door while Max thundered up the stairs to the bathroom. The porch light cast a warm glow, and crickets chirped in the summer evening. "Thank you for dinner," Ethan said, suddenly awkward again. "I can't remember the last time I had a home-cooked meal." "Well, we can't have that," Grace smiled. "Consider yourself welcome any time. Max clearly adores you." Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He walked slowly to his car, looking back once to see Grace still in the doorway. Light spilled out around her, and he could hear Max singing in the bathroom upstairs. As he drove back to his inn, the empty luxury suite felt colder than ever. His phone showed dozens of missed calls and emails, but for the first time in his adult life, Ethan Sterling couldn't bring himself to care about any of them. His thoughts kept drifting back to mismatched forks, burned garlic bread, and the simple joy of playing heart and soul with a little boy who looked at him like he hung the moon. Chapter 7. Sparks of Change. Chapter 7. The Kite Lesson. The morning sun warmed the grass at Willow Creek Park as Ethan walked along the path, his polished leather shoes out of place among the scattered dandelions. He spotted Grace and Max near the open field, a red diamond-shaped kite tucked under Max's arm. "Mr. Sterling!" Max waved frantically, nearly dropping the kite. "You came!" Ethan nodded, tugging at his collar. He'd at least traded his suit jacket for a light sweater today, but he still felt overdressed compared to Grace's jeans and casual t-shirt. "I said I would." He glanced at the kite. "Though I should warn you, I've never actually flown one of those." Grace's eyes widened. "Never? Not even as a kid?" "My father considered recreational activities a waste of time." The words came out more bitter than he'd intended. "Well, today's your lucky day." Grace took the kite from Max and held it out. "Max is an excellent teacher." Max puffed up his chest. "I can show you everything. First, you need to hold it like this." He demonstrated with his arms spread wide. Ethan accepted the kite awkwardly, mimicking Max's stance. The plastic and wood frame felt flimsy in his hands, nothing like the solid weight of a laptop or phone. "Now what?" he asked. "Now the fun part." Max grabbed the ball of string and started running backward. "When I say go, you lift it up and I'll pull." Grace stepped closer to adjust Ethan's grip. Her fingers were warm against his as she repositioned his hands. "Relax your arms a little. Kite flying is about feeling the wind, not forcing it." Ethan tried to loosen his rigid posture. The breeze ruffled his carefully combed hair, and he could smell Grace's light, flowery perfume. "Ready?" Max called out, bouncing on his toes. "Go!" Ethan lifted the kite, but instead of soaring gracefully upward, it immediately nosedived into the grass. Max giggled. "Perhaps I should stick to corporate takeovers," Ethan muttered. "Oh no, you don't get off that easy." Grace retrieved the kite. "Try again. This time, wait for the wind." 3 more attempts ended with similar results. The kite spun in circles, crashed into a bush, and nearly hit a passing jogger. Each time, Max's laughter grew louder, and even Grace was fighting to keep a straight face. "I fail to see what's so amusing about my incompetence," Ethan said. But there was less edge to his voice than usual. "It's not that," Grace said, untangling string from around his feet. "It's just, you should see your face. The great Ethan Sterling, defeated by a $10 kite. I'll have you know, this is a highly complex aerodynamic device." "Uh-huh." Grace's eyes sparkled. "And I'm sure you have a PowerPoint presentation to prove it." Something about her teasing tone, so different from the careful deference he usually received, caught him off guard. A chuckle escaped before he could stop it. "Was that a laugh?" Grace gasped in mock shock. "Quick, Max, mark the calendar." "I do not laugh," Ethan protested, but his lips twitched traitorously. "You totally did." Max jumped up and down. "Do it again!" "I most certainly will not," Ethan started, but just then the wind gusted, wrapping the kite string around his legs. He stumbled, arms windmilling, and landed rather ungracefully on his backside. The laughter burst out of him then, deep and genuine, shaking his whole body. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like this, without restraint or calculation. Grace and Max joined in, their joy echoing across the park. When they finally caught their breath, Grace spread out a checkered blanket on the grass. "Here, sit. Let's try a different approach." She showed him how to feel the direction of the wind, how to let the kite catch it naturally instead of forcing it up. Max demonstrated the proper way to feed out the string, his small hands sure and confident. Gradually, Ethan began to understand. The kite responded to gentle guidance rather than rigid control, so different from his usual strategy of bending everything to his will. When the red diamond finally caught an updraft and soared into the blue sky, Max cheered and Grace squeezed his arm in congratulation. They sat together on the blanket, watching the kite dance above them. Max lay on his stomach, carefully managing the string, while Grace leaned back on her elbows, face tilted toward the sun. Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders slowly unwind. "I can't remember the last time I laughed like that," he admitted quietly. "Years, probably." Grace turned to look at him, her expression softening. "Then maybe you just forgot how to live." The simple truth of her words hit him like a physical force. He had forgotten, buried himself so deep in spreadsheets and stock prices that he'd lost touch with simple joys like this. The realization left him speechless, staring at the kite as it floated against the clouds. Chapter 8. The Central Conflict Appears. Chapter 8. The Storm Arrives. Scene 1. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Grace's small backyard as Max played with his new stuffed bear. Ethan sat in a weathered garden chair, watching the boy create an elaborate adventure story involving the toy. Something inside him had loosened over the past few days, like a knot slowly coming undone. Grace emerged from the kitchen with 3 glasses of lemonade on a tray. "Careful, it's my secret recipe," she warned with a smile, handing Ethan a glass. "Let me guess, actual lemons instead of powder mix?" Ethan took a sip, surprised by the perfect balance of sweet and tart. "And fresh mint from my garden." Grace settled into the chair beside him. "You're learning our simple ways, Mr. Billionaire." Max bounded over, grabbing his glass. "Can Mr. Sterling stay for dinner again, please?" Before Ethan could respond, the sharp click of heels on concrete cut through the peaceful scene. A tall woman in a crisp business suit strode around the corner of the house, tablet in hand. "Mr. Sterling, thank goodness I found you." Diana, his personal assistant, looked severely out of place in Grace's modest backyard. Ethan straightened, tension returning to his shoulders. "Diana, what are you doing here? I've been trying to reach you for hours." She thrust the tablet toward him. "Your phone's been off, and this couldn't wait." Grace gathered Max closer, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The boy clutched his bear, eyes darting between the adults. Ethan scanned the documents on the screen, his face darkening. "This can't be right. Harrison wouldn't dare." "The board meeting's tomorrow morning. They're moving to vote you out, sir. Harrison's gathered enough support to force a takeover, unless you're there to stop it." Diana's words carried the weight of a hammer falling. Grace watched as Ethan's familiar business mask slipped back into place, erasing the relaxed man who'd been laughing with them moments before. "Book the jet. I'll need the latest projections and shareholder reports. Ethan stood, already shifting into crisis mode. He turned to Grace, his expression torn. I'm sorry. I have to. Go. Grace finished for him, her voice gentle but guarded. We understand. Max's lower lip trembled. But you promised to teach me chess tomorrow. Ethan knelt down to Max's level, his expensive trousers pressing into the grass. I have to take care of something important, buddy, but I'll be back soon, I promise. How soon? Max's small voice cracked. Just a few days. I'll bring you a proper chess set when I return. Ethan reached out to ruffle Max's hair, then hesitated, letting his hand fall. Diana cleared her throat. Sir, we need to leave now to make the flight window. Grace stood, brushing off her jeans. Come on, Max. Let's help Mr. Sterling gather his things from the guest room. The walk to Grace's front door felt longer than usual. Max trudged behind them, dragging his bear across the floor. Ethan's suitcase, which he'd brought over earlier that day, waited by the entrance. Grace, I. Ethan started, but the words tangled in his throat. It's okay. Your company needs you. Grace's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. We've enjoyed having you around. I meant what I said. I'll be back. Ethan gripped his suitcase handle tightly. This place, you and Max. It's become important to me. Diana waited by the sleek town car, engine already running. Ethan stepped outside, then turned back one last time. I promise I'll return. You can count on that. Grace stood in the doorway, one arm around Max's shoulders. She watched Ethan's car pull away, the same way she'd watched Max's father drive off years ago, making similar promises. They all say that, she whispered, more to herself than to Max, who kept waving until the car disappeared around the corner. Doubt clouded her face as she held her son closer, wondering if she'd been foolish to let another man into their carefully built world. Max's small hand found hers, squeezing tight, as if he somehow understood the weight of the moment. The middle. Chapter 9. Back to the boardroom. Chapter 9. Business and Longing. Scene 1. The elevator doors opened onto the 87th floor of Sterling Technologies, and Ethan Sterling burst out like a thundercloud. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished marble floors as he strode through the office. Employees scattered at his approach, ducking behind computer screens and pretending to be busy. Sarah, he called out to his assistant, boardroom, now, and get everyone in there. Yes, Mr. Sterling. Sarah scrambled to gather her tablet and follow him, her heels racing to keep up with his pace. The hostile takeover team is already assembled. The glass walls of the conference room held a dozen anxious faces, his top executives and legal teams seated around the massive table. As Ethan entered, they rose in unison, like a well-choreographed dance born from years of corporate protocol. Sit, he commanded, dropping his briefcase onto the table. Talk to me. How did Morrison Tech get this close without us seeing it coming? The chief financial officer cleared his throat. Sir, they've been quietly buying shares through shell companies for months. They now control nearly 30% of— I can read the numbers, James, Ethan cut in sharply. But then, unexpectedly, the sound of Max's delighted laughter echoed in his memory. The pure joy, when they'd finally gotten that kite in the air. Ethan paused, his expression softening slightly. What I need to know is how we protect our people. The executives exchanged surprised glances at his choice of words. Normally, Ethan talked about protecting assets and market share, not people. Well, Sarah ventured, we have over 10,000 employees who could be affected if Morrison's cost-cutting plans go through. Ethan nodded, thinking of Grace working her 2 jobs, of her determination to provide for Max. Then that's our priority. Show me options that keep our workforce intact. For the next 2 hours, they dissected strategies and scenarios. Ethan's usual rapid-fire dismissals of ideas were replaced with thoughtful consideration. When the junior legal counsel suggested an employee stock ownership program as part of their defense, Ethan actually smiled, a sight so rare that Sarah nearly dropped her tablet. That's good thinking, Danny, he said, remembering how Grace had praised Max's wobbly attempt at making pancakes. Sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places. By late afternoon, They had hammered out the framework of a defense strategy. As the team filed out, Ethan caught himself humming the tune Max had been singing during their kite-flying adventure. He stopped abruptly, but Sarah had noticed. "Sir," she asked carefully, "are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," he replied, straightening his tie. "Just schedule a company-wide meeting for tomorrow. I want to address everyone personally about this situation." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. In 15 years, Ethan had never held an all-hands meeting. "Of course, sir. And there are several dinner invitations from board members tonight. To discuss." "Cancel them," Ethan said, walking to his office. "I need to work." But as night fell over Manhattan, Ethan found himself standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. His laptop sat forgotten on his desk. Instead of reviewing merger documents, his mind wandered to Grace's small kitchen, where mismatched plates somehow made dinner feel more special than any five-star restaurant. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to the one photo he'd allowed himself to take. Max proudly holding up the stuffed bear they'd won at the fair. Grace was in the background, her eyes crinkled with laughter, hair slightly messy from the wind. Something in his chest tightened. The city spread out before him like a glittering empire, his empire. He'd spent 20 years building it, sacrificing everything else to reach these heights. Yet now, standing in his corner office, worth more than Grace's entire house, he felt strangely empty. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. The truth hit him with surprising force. He missed them. He missed Max's endless questions about everything from clouds to computers. He missed Grace's gentle teasing that somehow made him feel more human. He missed the simple peace of sitting in their backyard, drinking lemonade made with real lemons and fresh mint. His phone buzzed with another crisis email, but for the first time in his career, Ethan Sterling, the man who had built a tech empire through sheer determination, wished he was somewhere else. Somewhere with pine-scented air and lake water lapping at the shore. Somewhere with a little boy's laughter and a woman's knowing smile. How had they managed to work their way so deeply under his skin in just a few days? He'd spent his entire adult life keeping people at arm's length, measuring relationships in terms of strategic value. But now, standing alone in his perfectly appointed office, all he could think about was whether Max had managed to finish that puzzle they'd started together, and if Grace was working too hard at her evening shift at the diner. The lights of passing helicopters cast moving shadows across his office walls. In their movement, he saw echoes of Max running through the park, of Grace dancing in her kitchen while making dinner. His empire might be under attack, but his heart, that carefully guarded fortress, had already been invaded by a small-town single mother and her imaginative son. Chapter 10. A Call Across Miles. Chapter 9. Back to the boardroom. Scene 2. Chapter 9. A Phone Call Home. Ethan sat in his dimly lit office, the Manhattan skyline twinkling through floor-to-ceiling windows. His tie hung loose around his neck, and stacks of takeover documents cluttered his usually pristine desk. The clock on the wall showed 8:45 p.m., late enough that most of his employees had gone home, but still early evening in Willow Creek. His fingers hovered over Grace's number on his phone. He'd saved it 3 days ago but hadn't called yet. What would he say? Business calls were easy, direct, purposeful, efficient. But this felt different. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before Grace's soft voice answered. "Hello? Grace? It's Ethan." He sat up straighter, as if she could see him through the phone. "Oh?" Her voice held a note of surprise. "And something else? Hesitation?" "I wasn't sure if we'd hear from you." In the background, he heard a familiar excited voice. "Is that Ethan? Can I talk to him? Please, Mom?" "Max, honey, not now. I'm on the phone," Grace said, her voice slightly muffled as if she'd turned away from the receiver. "But Mom, is Daddy coming back?" Max's voice carried clearly through the line. Ethan's chest tightened at the word Daddy. He heard Grace's embarrassed intake of breath. "Max, I've told you not to. I'm so sorry, Ethan." He gets excited." "It's okay," Ethan said quickly, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Actually, could I talk to him for a minute? A pause. Then Grace's soft, "Of course." He heard rustling, then Max's breathless, "Hello?" "Hey, buddy." Ethan's voice softened automatically. "How's that stuffed bear doing?" "Mr. growls. He sleeps in my bed every night. Mom says I have to wash my hands before I hold him so he stays clean." Max's words tumbled out in a rush. "When are you coming back? You promised." Ethan's throat felt tight. "I did promise, didn't I? And I keep my promises, Max. I just need to take care of some important work first." "More important than playing with me?" The innocence in Max's question hit Ethan like a physical blow. "No," Ethan said slowly, realizing as he spoke that it was true. "Not more important. Just something I need to finish so I can come back and spend more time with you and your mom." "How about you tell me what you did today?" Max launched into an enthusiastic description of his day at school, complete with a detailed account of the class pet hamster's escape attempt and his triumph at spelling elephant correctly. Ethan found himself smiling, picturing the boy's animated expressions. After a few minutes, Grace's voice came back on the line. "Thanks for talking to him. He's missed you." "I've missed him too." The words slipped out before Ethan could stop them. "And you," he added quietly. The silence that followed felt charged with unspoken things. Through the phone, he could hear the homey sounds of dishes being washed, Max humming in the background. "How are you holding up?" Grace asked finally. "You sound tired." Ethan glanced at the takeover documents on his desk. "Long days. The situation here is complicated." "More complicated than teaching an uptight billionaire to skip rocks?" He could hear the teasing smile in her voice. A chuckle escaped him. "Nothing could be that complicated." He paused, then added, "Though I've been practicing. Next time I won't be so terrible at it." "Next time," Grace repeated softly. "Ethan, I know you have important things to handle there. Just don't forget about the important things here too, okay?" Her words echoed in his mind as they said their goodbyes. He set the phone down and stood, walking to the window. Below, the city bustled with its usual frenetic energy, but for the first time in his life, it felt hollow. In his mind, he could still hear Max's innocent question. "More important than playing with me?" The corporate takeover that had seemed so crucial just hours ago suddenly felt less significant. What was he fighting so hard to protect? An empire of glass and steel or something more meaningful? Ethan pressed his forehead against the cool window glass. The ache in his chest had nothing to do with stress this time. He thought of Grace's warm kitchen, Max's infectious laughter, the simple joy of skipping rocks by the lake. For the first time in his driven, successful life, he wondered if he'd been measuring wealth all wrong. Behind him, his computer pinged with another urgent email about the takeover. But Ethan kept staring out at the city lights, feeling the unfamiliar pull of something that felt suspiciously like love. Chapter 11. Fighting Smarter Not Harder. Chapter 10. A Shift in Strategy. Scene 2. The morning sun streamed through the glass walls of Sterling Technologies' main conference room, casting long shadows across the polished table. Ethan adjusted his tie, preparing for another day of negotiations. But something felt different. The weight of Grace's words echoed in his mind. Life isn't about managing time, it's about living it. Sandra, his head of operations, was mid-presentation when Ethan noticed her hands trembling slightly as she flipped through her papers. In the past, he would have drummed his fingers impatiently or cut her off. Instead, he remembered how Grace had listened to Max's endless stories about dinosaurs, giving the boy her full attention. "Sandra," Ethan said softly, "take your time. We're all here to listen." The room fell silent. Several board members exchanged surprised glances. Sandra's shoulders relaxed, and her voice grew stronger as she continued. During the lunch break, Ethan overheard whispers in the hallway. "Is Sterling feeling okay?" one executive murmured. He actually smiled during the meeting. Back at his desk, Ethan reviewed acquisition proposals, but his usual sharp focus kept drifting to memories of skipping rocks with Max. He picked up his phone and called down to the IT department. "James," he said to the department head, "about that deadline for the system upgrade. I know you said your team needed an extra week. You've got it." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir? Are you sure?" "Yes. Better to do it right than rush it. And James, thank your team for me. They've been putting in long hours." The afternoon brought a crucial negotiation with potential investors. Instead of his usual aggressive stance, Ethan leaned back in his chair and really listened. He noticed things he'd missed before, the way the lead investor kept touching his wedding ring, how the junior partner's eyes lit up when discussing sustainable technology. "My son." Ethan caught himself, his heart skipping a beat at referring to Max that way. "He reminded me recently that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. What if we approached this differently?" The meeting ended with handshakes and genuine smiles. His assistant, Linda, poked her head in afterward. "Mr. Sterling, that was different. In a good way. They're already drafting the preliminary agreement." Ethan nodded, straightening his desk. Sometimes you have to step back to see the whole picture clearly. Throughout the week, the changes rippled through the office. Ethan started asking about people's families, remembering details about their lives. He approved a proposal for an on-site daycare center, something he'd dismissed as unnecessary expense just months ago. The memory of Grace juggling 2 jobs while raising Max had shifted his perspective. In the elevator one morning, he noticed a young intern struggling with an armload of files. "Here, let me help," he offered, taking half the stack. The poor intern nearly dropped the rest in shock. The hostile takeover threat began to recede as partnerships strengthened and employee morale soared. During a strategy session, someone mentioned how the company felt different lately. "More human," they said. Ethan found himself sharing simple lunches with his team instead of dining alone in his office. He told stories about Max's attempts to teach him kite flying, and for the first time his colleagues saw him laugh, really laugh. After one particularly successful meeting, his CFO pulled him aside. "Whatever's got into you lately, Ethan, keep it up. The board's thrilled, the staff is energized, and our stock price is climbing." Ethan just smiled, thinking of Grace's words about treating people like people, not resources. Late one evening, as the office grew quiet, Ethan sat at his desk. The city lights twinkled beyond his window, but his thoughts were far away, by a peaceful lake. He opened his leather planner, the same one that used to hold nothing but meetings and deadlines. With careful deliberation, he wrote, "Visit Grace and Max soon, non-negotiable." His pen hovered over the words for a moment. For the first time in his career, this simple personal note felt more important than any business contract he'd ever signed. Chapter 12. The Return to Willow Creek. Chapter 12. An Unexpected Return. Scene 1. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Grace's small front yard as Ethan's car pulled up to the curb. He sat for a moment, hands tight on the steering wheel, then reached for the grocery basket in the passenger seat. The wicker handle felt foreign in his usually document-clutching hands. Through the windshield he could see Max's bike propped against the porch railing and warm light glowing from the kitchen window. His heart did an unfamiliar flutter. 3 weeks had passed since he'd left for New York, though it felt like much longer. Ethan straightened his casual sweater, no suit today, and walked up the path to the door. Before he could knock, rapid footsteps thundered inside, and Max's voice carried through the wood. "Mom! Someone's here!" The door swung open, revealing Max's beaming face. "Mr. Ethan, you came back!" The boy launched himself forward, wrapping his arms around Ethan's waist. Ethan awkwardly balanced the basket with one hand while patting Max's shoulder with the other. "Hello, Max. I did promise, didn't I?" Grace appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her expression was guarded, but Ethan noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she gripped the towel. "This is unexpected," she said quietly. "I brought dinner ingredients." Ethan held up the basket. "I thought perhaps, well, I remember you mentioning, you make excellent lasagna." Max bounced on his toes. "Mom makes the best lasagna ever. Can he stay, please?" Grace's eyes met Ethan's, searching. He held her gaze, trying to convey sincerity through the silence. Finally, she stepped back from the doorway. "I suppose we can't let good groceries go to waste." The kitchen was warm and smelled of Cookie's chocolate chip. Ethan noticed, cooling on a rack by the window. Max immediately pulled him toward the small table while Grace unpacked the basket. "I tried to remember everything you mentioned that night," Ethan said, watching Grace examine the ingredients. "The fresh basil, ricotta cheese, those specific Italian tomatoes. You actually paid attention to my rambling about proper lasagna?" Grace raised an eyebrow, but Ethan caught the ghost of a smile. "I always pay attention to you," he said softly, then cleared his throat. "Though I admit, I had to Google what al dente meant." That drew a genuine laugh from Grace, the kind that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "Well then, Mr. Sterling, roll up those expensive sleeves. You're going to learn how to make proper lasagna." The next hour transformed the kitchen into a warm bubble of activity. Max sat at the table, supposedly doing homework, but mostly providing running commentary, as Grace taught Ethan the basics. His first attempt at layering noodles was messier than a corporate merger gone wrong. Gently, Grace guided his hands, her fingers warm against his. "You're not signing contracts here. The noodles won't bite." Ethan found himself relaxing into the domesticity of it all. There was something soothing about the simple act of creating food, watching Grace move confidently around her kitchen, hearing Max's constant chatter about his day at school. "And then in music class," Max was saying, "I got to play the piano. Ms. Johnson says I have natural talent." "You play piano?" Ethan asked, carefully spreading ricotta mixture as Grace had shown him. "He does." Grace nodded. "The school has an old upright in the music room. Max spends every free moment there." "I'm learning heart and soul," Max announced proudly. "But I can only practice at school, because we don't have a piano at home." Grace's shoulders tensed slightly, and Ethan bit back an immediate impulse to offer buying them one. He was learning that sometimes the best thing to say was nothing at all. Instead, he focused on layering the final noodles, while Grace prepared the garlic bread. The kitchen filled with wonderful smells as their creation baked, and they settled around the table with glasses of sparkling cider. Ethan had brought that too, remembering Grace didn't drink wine. "To cooking lessons." Grace raised her glass with a small smile. "To patient teachers," Ethan replied, clinking his glass against hers. Max giggled at their formality and clinked his own glass so enthusiastically that cider sloshed onto the tablecloth. "Oops! Sorry, Mom!" "It's just a splash, honey." Grace dabbed at it with a napkin, and Ethan noticed how her hands had relaxed, no longer gripping things quite so tightly. The lasagna, when it emerged from the oven, was perfectly golden brown on top. Grace served generous portions, and Ethan watched Max dive in with enthusiasm. "This is even better than last time," Max declared around a mouthful. "Don't talk with your mouth full, sweetie," Grace reminded him, but she was smiling. "Though I have to admit, it did turn out well. You might have a future in the kitchen, Ethan." "I had an excellent instructor," he said, savoring the rich flavors. "Though I doubt I could recreate this on my own." "Then I guess you'll have to come back for more lessons," Max said hopefully, looking between the adults. A moment of silence fell. Grace set down her fork, her expression growing serious. "Max, honey, Mr. Sterling is a very busy man. We can't expect—" "I'd like that," Ethan interrupted quietly. "Very much." Grace's eyes met his, and this time he saw not just wariness, but also a glimmer of something else. Hope, perhaps, carefully guarded. "Ethan," she said softly, "I need to be clear about something." She glanced at Max, who was happily focused on his second helping. "My son's heart isn't something to be toyed with. If you're going to be in his life, in our lives, you need to be sure." The weight of her words settled over the kitchen table. Ethan thought about his empty penthouse, about board meetings and profit margins, about the way Max's laughter had echoed in his mind during those long weeks in New York. "I understand," he said simply, meaning it more than any contract he'd ever signed. Max looked up from his plate, marinara sauce on his chin, and beamed at them both. And just like that, the serious moment dissolved into warm laughter as Grace reached over with a napkin to clean her son's face. Chapter 13. The Picnic of Dreams. Chapter 13. Sunday by the lake. The morning sun sparkled on the lake, like scattered diamonds as Ethan spread a checkered blanket across the grass. He smoothed each corner with careful precision, making Grace smile at his businessman's attention to detail. "It doesn't have to be perfect," she teased, setting down the wicker picnic basket. "We're going to mess it up anyway." Max bounced around them like an excited puppy, clutching a bright blue frisbee. "Can we play now? Please, please, please?" Ethan stood up, brushing invisible dust from his casual khakis, probably the most informal outfit Grace had ever seen him wear. "Well, I should warn you both. I haven't thrown a frisbee since." He paused, thinking, "Actually, I'm not sure I've ever thrown one." "Never?" Max's eyes went wide with disbelief. "That's crazy! Everyone knows how to throw a frisbee." "Then I guess you'll have to teach me," Ethan said, his usual serious expression softening into something warmer. Max grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward an open stretch of grass. "It's super easy. You just hold it like this." The boy demonstrated with exaggerated care, making Grace laugh from her spot on the blanket. For the next hour, the lakeside air filled with their voices. Max proved to be an enthusiastic, if not entirely patient teacher, while Ethan approached frisbee throwing with the same intensity he probably used in board meetings. His first few throws wobbled and crashed, but he kept trying, spurred on by Max's encouraging shouts. "You're thinking too hard," Grace called out, watching Ethan's furrowed brow. "It's not a business strategy, just let it fly." Something in her words clicked. Ethan's next throw sailed in a perfect arc, landing right in Max's waiting hands. The boy whooped with delight, and Ethan's face lit up with genuine pride. "Mom, did you see that? He did it!" Max ran over to high-five Ethan, who looked slightly startled but pleased by the gesture. Grace joined them, picking up the frisbee. "My turn to show you boys how it's done." She spun it with practiced ease, sending it soaring over their heads. Max scrambled after it while Ethan watched Grace with undisguised admiration. "Where did you learn to throw like that?" "Summer camp counselor, 3 years running," she replied with a grin. "You pick up a few skills." They played until their throws grew lazy and their stomachs started growling. Grace unpacked the picnic basket while Max regaled Ethan with stories about school and his piano lessons. She laid out simple sandwiches, fresh fruit, and cookies she'd baked that morning. "This is wonderful," Ethan said softly, biting into a sandwich. "I usually eat at my desk. This is—" He gestured at the lake, the trees, the blue sky above them. "This is better." Grace watched him relax into the moment, his usual sharp edges growing softer in the warm sunlight. Max leaned against Ethan's side, munching on a cookie, completely at ease. The sight made her heart twist in unexpected ways. After lunch, they sprawled on the blanket, letting the gentle breeze and distant lapping of waves lull them into peaceful quiet. Max's head rested on Grace's lap, while his feet pressed against Ethan's leg. Grace ran her fingers through her son's hair, watching his eyes grow heavy. "I think someone's ready for a nap," she whispered. Ethan smiled, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "I might join him," he admitted, stifling a yawn. "I forgot how tiring fun could be." They dozed in the dappled sunshine, the three of them forming an unlikely family tableau. Grace drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of Max's steady breathing and Ethan's solid presence beside them. For once, she didn't fight the comfortable feeling settling over her. When they finally stirred, the sun had shifted in the sky, painting everything in golden afternoon light. Max rubbed his eyes and immediately bounced back to full energy. "Can we go see the ducks?" he asked, pointing to where a family of mallards paddled near the shore. They packed up the blanket and basket, then walked along the water's edge. Max ran ahead, tossing bits of leftover bread to the ducks, while Ethan and Grace followed at a slower pace. "Thank you for today," Ethan said suddenly. "I never knew. I didn't understand what I was missing." Grace glanced at him. "Missing? This. Family. Real moments." He watched Max chase a butterfly. "I spent years thinking success meant bigger deals, more money, fancier offices. But this simple afternoon feels more successful than any merger I've ever closed." Before Grace could respond, Max ran back to them. "My legs are tired," he announced dramatically, looking up at Ethan with hopeful eyes. "Well, we can't have that," Ethan replied, crouching down. "Hop on." Max scrambled onto Ethan's shoulders with practiced ease, as if they'd done this 100 times before. Ethan stood carefully, holding Max's legs, while the boy gripped his hair for balance. "Wow, I can see everything from up here," Max exclaimed. "Mom, look how tall I am." Grace watched them walking ahead of her, Ethan ducking under low branches while Max giggled and pointed out birds in the trees. They looked so natural together, like they'd always been meant to find each other. The sight filled her with equal parts, joy and terror. She remembered other moments, other promises that had shattered. Max's father walking away before he was born. The boyfriend, 2 years ago, who'd sworn he was different, then disappeared when things got real. Her heart had scabbed over, protecting itself. But watching Ethan carry her son, listening to their shared laughter echo across the lake, Grace felt those careful shields starting to crack. She saw how gently Ethan held Max's legs, how he tilted his head to catch every word the boy said, how his face glowed with something that looked remarkably like love. The sun painted them in warm gold as they walked the path ahead of her. Grace's heart trembled in her chest, caught between hope and fear. Daring to trust again felt like stepping off a cliff. But watching them together made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, there would be something soft to catch her this time. Chapter 14. The Tabloid Storm. Chapter 14. Headlines and Heartbreak. The morning started like any other in Willow Creek. Grace hummed as she poured coffee into her favorite chipped mug, watching the sunrise through her kitchen window. Max sat at the table, happily munching on cereal and telling stories about yesterday's picnic with Ethan. Then her phone buzzed, and buzzed again, and again. Frowning, Grace picked it up. Her heart stopped when she saw the flood of notifications. Messages from friends, social media alerts, news headlines. Billionaire's secret small-town romance. Tech mogul Ethan Sterling's hidden love nest. Single mom catches billionaire's eye. Gold, digger, or true love? Her hands trembled as she clicked on one of the articles. There they were, photos from yesterday's picnic. Ethan carrying Max on his shoulders. Grace laughing as she handed Ethan a sandwich. Private moments turned into public spectacle. "Mommy?" Max's voice seemed far away. "Why are there people with cameras outside?" Grace rushed to the window. Sure enough, a small crowd of photographers had gathered on her front lawn, their long lenses pointed at her house like weapons. Her phone rang. "Ethan, Grace, I just saw the news. I'm so sorry. I'm calling my lawyers right now." "How did they find us?" Her voice cracked. "Someone must have recognized me and tipped them off. I should have been more careful. I'll fix this, I promise." A sharp knock at the door made Grace jump. Through the peephole, she saw reporters pressing against her porch, microphones ready. "Miss Turner, can you comment on your relationship with Ethan Sterling? How long have you been dating the billionaire? Is it true you're a waitress?" Grace backed away from the door, her heart pounding. Max clung to her leg, confused and frightened by the commotion. "Grace?" Ethan was still on the phone. "Don't answer the door. I'm on my way." But the damage was done. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications. Friends sending screenshots of online comments. "Gold digger alert? Single mom hits the jackpot. Poor guy. Probably doesn't even know if the kid is his." Another waitress trying to climb the social ladder. Tears burned in Grace's eyes as she scrolled through the cruel words. This was exactly what she'd feared. Her private life torn apart, her character questioned, her son exposed to public scrutiny. 20 minutes later, Ethan's black SUV pulled up outside. The photographers swarmed him as he pushed through to her door, his security team creating a path. Grace let him in quickly, slamming the door on the shouted questions. "I've got a legal team working on this," Ethan said immediately, his face tight with concern. "We can file cease and desist orders, get injunctions." "Stop." Grace's voice was quiet but firm. "Just stop. Grace, please, let me handle this." "Handle it?" She laughed bitterly. "Like you handle everything? With money and lawyers and damage control?" Max had retreated to his room, the sounds of his video game barely masking the chaos outside. "Look what this has done to our lives, Ethan." Grace gestured to the window where camera flashes still flickered. My son can't even play in his own yard now. My neighbors are probably selling stories about me to tabloids. I'll be lucky if I still have a job after this. I can protect you both, Ethan insisted. We can move somewhere more private, increase security. You don't get it. Grace's control finally broke. I don't want to move. I don't want security. I want my quiet life back. The life where Max could just be a normal kid, where I could work and live without everyone watching and judging and assuming the worst about me? Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. This is exactly why I was careful about letting you in, she continued, her voice shaking. Not because of your money or status, but because I knew something like this could happen. And now look. She wiped angry tears from her cheeks. They're calling me a gold digger. They're speculating about Max. They're turning our life into some sort of twisted fairy tale for their entertainment. Grace, please. Ethan's usual confidence had crumbled. We can get through this together. I care about you and Max more than what? Your empire? Your reputation? Grace shook her head. It doesn't matter. Because this circus is exactly what I've always tried to protect Max from. And now, you've brought it right to our doorstep. That's not fair, Ethan protested. I never wanted this to happen, but it did happen, and it will keep happening. Grace walked to the door and opened it. Please, leave. Grace, just go, Ethan. Her voice broke. Go back to your world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. We don't belong there, and you don't belong here. Not anymore. Ethan stood frozen, his face a mask of pain. Don't do this. Don't push me away when I can help. Help? Grace gestured at the chaos outside. This is what your help looks like. This is what being close to you costs. And it's too high a price for me and my son. Camera flashes exploded as Ethan stepped onto the porch. He turned back one last time, his eyes pleading. Grace, please. Low. She shut the door before he could finish, pressing her back against it as tears finally overtook her. Through the wood, she could hear the reporters shouting questions at Ethan, their voices mixing with the sound of her broken heart. Chapter 15. Alone Again. Chapter 15. Empty Victories. Scene 1. The Cost of Solitude. The private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport under a gray New York sky. Ethan Sterling sat motionless in his leather seat, his phone dark and silent beside him. The flight attendant had to clear her throat twice before he noticed they'd landed. We've arrived, Mr. Sterling. He nodded, without really seeing her. The drive into Manhattan passed in a blur of steel and glass, buildings reaching toward clouds that seemed as heavy as his heart. His driver, Thomas, kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror but knew better than to speak. The elevator ride to his penthouse felt endless. Each floor ticked by with a soft ding that echoed in his chest like a hollow drum. When the doors finally opened, Ethan stepped into his sprawling apartment. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, pristine, expensive, and completely lifeless. He dropped his keys on the marble counter with a clatter that rang through the empty space. The sound bounced off designer furniture and original artwork worth millions, yet none of it meant anything anymore. The sunset painted golden streaks across his floor-to-ceiling windows, but the warmth couldn't reach him. Ethan wandered from room to room like a ghost in his own home. In his home office, stock tickers scrolled endlessly across multiple screens. His company's share price was up, another victory he should have been celebrating. Instead, he could only think of Max's laughter at the lake and the way Grace's eyes crinkled when she smiled. In his bedroom, he loosened his tie and caught sight of himself in the full-length mirror. He stopped, really looking at himself for the first time in days. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His usually perfect suit hung slightly loose. He'd lost weight without noticing, but it was his expression that made him pause. Gone was the confident mask he'd worn for so long. Instead, a stranger stared back at him, lost and uncertain. "What happened to you?" he whispered to his reflection. Moving to his walk-in closet, rows of identical suits in subtle variations of gray and navy confronted him. Each one perfectly tailored, perfectly bland. His fingers brushed against the sleeve of a casual sweater he'd worn in Willow Creek, the one Max had spilled ice cream on. He'd meant to have it cleaned but forgot. Now that small chocolate stain felt more precious than all the designer labels surrounding it. The kitchen gleamed with unused appliances. Opening his refrigerator, he found it stocked by his housekeeper with prepared meals from his preferred chef. Nothing like Grace's slightly burned cookies or the messy spaghetti dinner where Max had gotten sauce everywhere. His throat tightened at the memory. Ethan poured himself a glass of water, the tap stream echoing in the silence. He remembered Grace's tiny kitchen, always filled with the sounds of life, Max's chatter, the radio playing old songs, Grace humming as she cooked. Here, the only sound was the soft hum of his top-of-the-line appliances. Moving to his living room, he sank into an ergonomic chair that cost more than Grace's monthly rent. The city sparkled beyond his windows, a sea of lights stretching to the horizon. From up here, he could see everything, except what really mattered. His phone buzzed. Another email about tomorrow's board meeting, another crisis that needed his attention, another reminder of the empire he'd built. He left it unanswered. Instead, he pulled up the photos from Willow Creek on his phone. There weren't many. He'd never been one for taking pictures. But there was one of Max flying his kite, his face pure joy. Another showed Grace throwing her head back in laughter at one of Ethan's failed attempts at skipping stones. The images blurred as his vision clouded. Standing abruptly, he walked to his wine room. Rows of perfectly organized bottles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars lined the temperature-controlled walls. He reached for one, then stopped. Even the thought of drinking alone in his perfect apartment made him feel sick. The silence pressed in around him, broken only by the soft whoosh of the climate control system. No children's laughter. No warm voice asking about his day. No one to share his thoughts with. No one to care if he came home at all. Ethan's footsteps echoed as he walked to his bedroom. The king-sized bed with its Egyptian cotton sheets looked cold and uninviting. He sat on the edge, loosening his tie further until it slipped free. The city lights cast shadows across his floor, and for the first time he truly felt the weight of his solitude. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper in the darkness. "I don't want to be alone anymore." The words hung in the air, honest and raw. No one was there to hear them, but speaking them aloud made them real in a way he couldn't take back. Chapter 16. The Decision. Chapter 16. A Bold Decision. Scene 1. Changing Course. Ethan sat in his dimly lit home office, staring at spreadsheets that once meant everything to him. The numbers blurred together as memories of Max's laughter and Grace's warm smile kept pushing through. He hadn't slept properly in days, dark circles forming under his eyes. His phone buzzed. Another message from his board about quarterly projections. He picked it up, then set it face down on his desk. The morning sun caught the edge of a small rock sitting on his desk, the one Max had taught him to skip. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself. He pressed the intercom button. "Sandra, call an emergency board meeting. Today, no excuses." 2 hours later, Ethan stood before his board of directors in their top-floor conference room. 12 faces stared back at him, a mix of confusion and concern. "I'm selling 30% of my controlling shares," he announced without preamble. The room erupted. Board members shot to their feet, voices overlapping in protest. Harrison, his longest-serving director, looked like he might faint. "Have you lost your mind?" demanded Patricia Chen, head of acquisitions. "The hostile takeover threat isn't even cold yet." Ethan raised his hand for silence. For once, his usual anxiety about public speaking was gone. "I'm establishing a nonprofit foundation in Willow Creek. The proceeds from the sale will fund it." "Willow Creek?" Harrison sputtered. "That backwater where you've been? Vacationing?" He spat the last word like it tasted bad. "That backwater showed me what really matters." Ethan's voice carried a strength he'd never felt before. "We're going to fund schools there, build playgrounds, support small businesses, create opportunities." "This is business suicide," Patricia warned. "The shareholders will revolt." "Then let them." Ethan picked up his briefcase. "The paperwork is already with legal. This isn't a discussion, it's a notification. He walked out, leaving chaos in his wake. His assistant hurried after him, tablet in hand. "Sir, your schedule. Clear it," he said. "All of it. And get me Walter Kane from the Foundation Center. We have work to do." Over the next week, Ethan threw himself into planning with the same intensity he'd once reserved for hostile takeovers. His penthouse became command central for a different kind of operation. Where stock reports once littered his coffee table, now architectural plans for a community center spread out. His usual financial advisors were replaced by education experts and community development specialists. The media caught wind of his plans. "Sterling Industries CEO goes soft?" screamed one headline. "Billionaire's midlife crisis?" mocked another. Ethan didn't bother reading them. Late one night he stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. His reflection showed a different man than the one who'd left Willow Creek. The stern lines around his mouth had softened. His shoulders, though tired, carried a different kind of weight now. Purpose instead of just responsibility. He thought about Grace's words, "Life isn't about managing time. It's about living it." For the first time, he truly understood what she meant. The foundation plans came together faster than anyone expected. Ethan's corporate efficiency, turned toward helping others, proved remarkably effective. He hired local Willow Creek residents to run the programs, ensuring the community would have a voice in its own development. His personal assistant found him in his office early one morning, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. "The first round of funding has been released," she reported. "The community center construction starts next week." Ethan nodded, then looked up at her. "Sandra, I need you to do something else for me." "Of course, sir. Find me a house in Willow Creek. Something modest, near the lake. And," he paused, "have my things packed up here." Sandra's professional mask slipped for just a moment, showing surprise, but she recovered quickly. "All of them, sir?" "Yes." He stood up and walked to his window one last time. "I won't be coming back to live here." That evening, Ethan moved through his penthouse, past the expensive art and designer furniture that had never really felt like home. In his bedroom, he pulled out a simple duffel bag, the same one he'd taken on his first trip to Willow Creek. He packed light. Some casual clothes, a few family photos, and Max's rock. The rest could be donated or sold. The trappings of his old life didn't matter anymore. His phone rang. The board's latest attempt to change his mind. He let it go to voicemail. Instead, he pulled up a photo on his phone. Grace and Max at the lake, their faces bright with laughter. He'd taken it that perfect afternoon before everything fell apart. Ethan zipped up his bag with determined finality. His face in the bedroom mirror showed none of his old uncertainty. He knew exactly what he was doing, and for the first time in his life, the path ahead felt absolutely clear. The end. Chapter 17. A Return of Purpose. Chapter 17. A Town's Hope. Scene 1. The Foundation. The evening sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek's community center as people filed in for the hastily called town meeting. The wooden floors creaked under shuffling feet while neighbors whispered among themselves, wondering about the mysterious agenda. Ethan Sterling stood at the back, his usual tailored suit replaced by khakis and a simple button-down shirt. His heart pounded as he watched the room fill up. A few people recognized him, pointing and murmuring. He caught snippets of their conversations, mostly about the tabloid scandal that had rocked their quiet town just weeks ago. Mayor Thompson, a stout woman with silver hair, called the meeting to order. "Everyone, please settle down. We have an unexpected guest who'd like to address our community." Ethan walked to the front, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He cleared his throat and looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, others openly hostile. In the very back, partially hidden by a support beam, stood Grace. Her presence made his throat tight, but he forced himself to focus. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "My name is Ethan Sterling, though many of you already know that. What you might not know is that your town has taught me more about life in a few weeks than I learned in 42 years of chasing success." He pulled out a folder and placed it on the podium. "I'm here tonight because I want to give something back to Willow Creek. not as a publicity stunt or a corporate takeover, but as someone who's found something precious here, something money can't buy. An elderly man in the front row scoffed. Easy for a billionaire to say, Ethan nodded, acknowledging the skepticism. You're right, I've been privileged, but privilege comes with responsibility. That's why I've established the Willow Creek Community Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Mayor Thompson's eyes widened as Ethan handed her the folder containing the official documentation. The foundation has 3 main initiatives, Ethan continued, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the murmurs. First, education. We're establishing a grant program for the local schools, funding everything from new textbooks to after-school programs. Every child in Willow Creek deserves the best education possible. He clicked to the next slide of his presentation, showing architectural renderings. Second, community spaces. We're building new playgrounds, renovating the park by the lake, and creating a community center with free programs for children and adults alike. The images showed beautiful green spaces, modern playground equipment, and a welcoming building with large windows. Several parents in the audience leaned forward, interest replacing their initial suspicion. Finally, Ethan said, his voice softening. Small business support. We're creating a low-interest loan program for local entrepreneurs, along with mentorship opportunities. Willow Creek's charm comes from its independent shops and restaurants. We want to help them thrive. A hand shot up from the middle of the room. And what's the catch, Mr. Sterling? Ethan met the questioner's gaze directly. No catch. The foundation will be run by a board of local citizens with complete transparency. I'll have no controlling interest. This isn't about me, it's about Willow Creek. He gestured to a local lawyer standing nearby. Sarah Matthews here has reviewed all the documentation. She can confirm that everything is legitimate and binding. Sarah stepped forward, nodding. I've gone through every detail. This is real, folks. Mr. Sterling has created something that could transform our town. The room buzzed with excitement now. Mayor Thompson was already flipping through the folder, her face brightening with each page. Parents were discussing the possibilities for their children, and small business owners were whispering excitedly among themselves. Ethan held up his hands for attention one last time. I know my presence here has caused some disruption. For that, I'm truly sorry. But this town showed me what really matters in life: community, kindness, and the joy of simple moments. This foundation is my way of saying thank you. He stepped back from the podium, and Mayor Thompson took his place. As she began discussing the practical details, the room filled with animated conversation. People who had been glaring at Ethan minutes ago were now smiling and nodding in his direction. At the back of the room, Grace remained still, her arms crossed. But her expression had softened, and there was something in her eyes, not quite forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. She didn't approach him, but she didn't leave either, listening intently as the mayor outlined the foundation's plans. The energy in the room continued to build. Someone started clapping, and others joined in. Soon the community center echoed with applause and cheers. Parents hugged their children, teachers high-fived each other, and small business owners shook hands excitedly. Ethan stood quietly to the side, letting the town's enthusiasm wash over him. This wasn't about grand gestures or buying affection. It was about giving back to a place that had given him something priceless, a glimpse of what life could be when measured in moments rather than millions. From his position, he could still see Grace in the back of the room. She hadn't joined in the cheering, but there was a thoughtful look on her face as she watched her neighbors celebrate. For now, that was enough. Chapter 18. Proving His Heart. Chapter 17. A Return of Purpose. Scene 2. Chapter 17. Actions Speak Louder. The morning sun had barely risen when Ethan rolled up his sleeves outside Mrs. Henderson's white picket fence. Paint flakes scattered in the breeze as he scraped the old wood with careful, methodical strokes. His expensive watch lay forgotten in his pocket, replaced by work gloves and determination. "You're holding that scraper all wrong," called Tom, the local handyman. He demonstrated the correct angle, and Ethan adjusted his grip without hesitation. A few passers-by slowed their cars to stare at the billionaire doing manual labor, but Ethan paid them no mind. By mid-morning, the fence gleamed with fresh white paint. Mrs. Henderson brought out homemade lemonade, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she poured. "My Harold used to maintain this fence," she said softly. "Haven't had the heart to touch it since he passed." Ethan accepted the glass with a gentle smile. "It's my honor to help, Mrs. Henderson." Later that afternoon, Ethan joined the garden club in planting flower beds along Main Street. His hands, more accustomed to signing contracts than digging in dirt, worked steadily alongside retired schoolteachers and young mothers. Someone showed him how to properly space the marigolds, and he listened intently, as focused as he'd ever been in any boardroom. At Lucy's diner, the lunch rush hit hard when 2 servers called in sick. Without being asked, Ethan stepped behind the counter, donning an apron. He fumbled with the coffee pot at first, spilling some on his shoes that cost more than a month's rent for most locals. "Here," Lucy demonstrated. "Keep the pot tilted just so." Her skeptical expression softened as she watched him master the technique, serving cup after cup with growing confidence. From her spot across the street at the bookstore where she worked, Grace caught glimpses of Ethan throughout the day. She saw him help old Joe carry groceries to his car, watched him kneel to tie a child's shoelace, noticed how he stepped aside to let others go first at the crosswalk. These weren't grand gestures for the cameras. They were quiet moments when he thought no one was watching. The next morning, Ethan joined the volunteer crew fixing the playground equipment at the park. His suit jacket hung forgotten on a fence post as he sanded rough edges from the slide and tightened loose bolts on the swings. The other volunteers were wary at first, but his willingness to take direction and do the unglamorous tasks gradually won them over. "Never thought I'd see a billionaire with splinters," remarked Mike, the hardware store owner, passing Ethan a Band-Aid. Ethan examined his palm with a rueful smile. First time for everything. At the community garden, Ethan learned the difference between weeds and seedlings from Mrs. Rodriguez, who had tended the plots for 30 years. His rows weren't as straight as hers, but she nodded approvingly at his careful attention to each plant. "Gardens teach patience," she told him. "Like people, they grow in their own time." Grace watched from her lunch break as Ethan helped unload donations at the food bank. His designer clothes were wrinkled and stained, but his face showed more peace than she'd ever seen in him. He worked steadily, without complaint or attempts to take charge, just one more pair of hands in the chain of volunteers. The afternoon light was growing long when the elementary school bell rang. Children poured out onto the sidewalk, their backpacks bouncing and voices rising in end-of-day excitement. Ethan stood back, watching the flow of families reuniting, when a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Ethan! Mr. Ethan!" Max burst from the crowd, his backpack half open and hair tousled. His small hand found Ethan's larger one naturally, tugging with enthusiasm. "I got an A on my science project. The one about rocks, remember? You helped me find the specimens." Ethan's face lit up with genuine pride. "That's fantastic, Max. I knew you could do it." Grace, standing in the doorway of the bookstore, felt her breath catch at the sight. Max's other hand clutched his project proudly while he bounced on his toes, explaining every detail to an attentive Ethan. They looked so natural together. The tall man bending down to better hear the excited boy, their matching grins, the easy way Max leaned against Ethan's side. This wasn't the calculated businessman who had first arrived in Willow Creek. This was someone else entirely, someone who had learned to listen, to care, to be present in small moments. Someone who had discovered that true worth wasn't measured in dollar signs, but in the trust of a child's hand in yours. The sight stirred something in Grace's heart, a feeling she'd been trying to ignore. Because this Ethan, the one with paint on his clothes and dirt under his nails, the one who remembered to ask Mrs. Plaint Henderson about her arthritis, and knew exactly how Max liked his hot chocolate, this Ethan was becoming harder to resist with each passing day. Max tugged Ethan's hand again, pointing toward the ice cream shop. They fell into step together, Max skipping every few steps to keep up with Ethan's longer stride. The evening sun caught them in its golden light, casting long shadows that merged together on the sidewalk, a tall one and a small one, walking in perfect sync. Chapter 19. Walls begin to fall. Chapter 18. Proving His Heart. Scene 2. A second chance at coffee. The small coffee shop on Main Street buzzed with morning activity. Ethan arrived early, choosing a quiet corner table away from the windows. His fingers drummed against the wooden surface as he waited, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy. The bell above the door chimed, and Grace walked in. She wore simple jeans and a blue sweater, her hair swept back in a casual ponytail. Ethan stood quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. A few regular customers glanced their way, but Grace's presence commanded all of his attention. "You came," he said softly, pulling out a chair for her. Grace settled into the seat, her movements careful and measured. "Max insisted," she replied, though her slight smile suggested there might be more to it. "He talks about you constantly." Sarah, the elderly owner, approached their table with a knowing look. "The usual for you, Grace? Vanilla latte?" "Yes, please. Black coffee for me," Ethan added. When Sarah left, silence settled between them. Grace wrapped her hands around her water glass, studying the condensation forming on its surface. Ethan watched her, trying to find the right words. "I've been watching you," Grace finally said, her voice low. "These past few weeks, painting fences, helping at the soup kitchen, fixing Mr. Peterson's roof. I wanted to show you and everyone that I'm serious about being here." "Why?" Her eyes met his, searching. "You have $1 billion company, penthouses, private jets. Why are you really here, Ethan?" He leaned back, considering her question. The coffee shop's warm aroma surrounded them as Sarah delivered their drinks, giving them a moment to gather their thoughts. "Do you know what I did last Christmas?" Ethan asked, stirring his coffee absently. When Grace shook her head, he continued. "I sat alone in my penthouse, surrounded by expensive decorations my assistant picked out, eating a gourmet meal prepared by my private chef. I had everything money could buy, and I felt nothing." Grace took a sip of her latte, listening intently. "Then I met you and Max." Ethan's voice softened. "That first dinner at your house, remember? Max had spilled his milk, and you just laughed, and turned it into a game of who could clean it up fastest. The kitchen was chaos, but there was so much joy in that moment, more than I'd felt in 20 years of building my empire." "Life with an 8-year-old is always chaos," Grace said, but her tone had warmed slightly. "I want that chaos," Ethan admitted. "I want the spilled milk, and the muddy shoes, and the homework battles. I've spent my whole life building things that look perfect from the outside, but they're hollow inside." He paused, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. "I've built an empire, but I've never built a home." Grace's expression softened at the raw honesty in his voice. "And you think you can find that here? In Willow Creek?" "I know I can," Ethan replied. "Because it's not about the place, it's about the people. It's about Max's laughter when I completely mess up at skipping rocks. It's about the way you challenge me to be better, to be real." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough to feel its warmth. "It's about learning that success isn't measured in quarterly reports or stock prices." "You make it sound so simple," Grace said, though her voice wavered slightly. "It's not simple at all," Ethan acknowledged. "I know I hurt you with the media circus. I know trust doesn't come easily, especially after what Max's father did. But I'm not asking for blind faith, Grace. I'm asking for a chance to prove, day by day, that I'm here for the long haul." Grace was quiet for a long moment, running her finger along the rim of her coffee cup. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm light across their table. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Max asked me last night if you were going to leave like his dad did." Her eyes met Ethan's, filled with both vulnerability and strength. "I didn't know what to tell him." "I'm not leaving," Ethan said firmly. "I've signed a lease on the old Miller house. I'm joining the town council. I'm learning to garden, for heaven's sake." This drew a small laugh from Grace. "I know I have to earn your trust, both yours and Max's, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Grace studied him, really looked at him, seeing past the expensive clothes to the man underneath, a man who had everything and nothing at the same time. She saw the hope in his eyes, the sincerity in his slightly awkward posture, so different from his usual corporate confidence. "The media will always be interested in you," she said. "Your world will always be different from ours." "My world is wherever you and Max are," Ethan replied simply. "Everything else is just details." A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee. Through the window, they could see the town coming to life. Shopkeepers opening their stores, children walking to school, neighbors greeting each other on the sidewalk. It was everything Ethan's life had been missing, everything he hadn't known he needed until now. Grace set down her cup, her eyes meeting his with new warmth. She looked into his eyes and whispered, "Maybe it's not too late." Chapter 20. Family Moments. Chapter 19. Walls begin to fall. Scene 2. The evening sun cast long shadows through Grace's kitchen window as Ethan stood awkwardly in the doorway, holding a grocery bag filled with baking supplies. The warm scent of vanilla already filled the small space. Grace had started getting things ready. "You came!" Max exclaimed, bouncing on his toes near the counter. He wore a too-big apron that dragged on the floor, covered in flour handprints. "I promised, didn't I?" Ethan smiled, setting down the bag. His suit jacket looked out of place in the homey kitchen, and he carefully folded it over a chair. Grace glanced up from where she was measuring flour. "You can roll up those fancy sleeves, Mr. Sterling. This is about to get messy." Ethan complied, methodically folding his white shirt sleeves to his elbows. "I'll have you know I've never failed at anything I've attempted." "Oh, really?" Grace raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Have you ever actually baked cookies before?" "Well, no, but..." "Then prepare to be humbled," she laughed, handing him an apron decorated with dancing cookies. Max giggled at the sight of the serious businessman wearing such a silly thing. "First rule of cookie making," Max declared importantly. "You gotta taste the chocolate chips to make sure they're good enough." "That so?" Ethan asked, reaching for the bag of chocolate chips. Grace swatted his hand playfully. "Don't encourage him. We'll have no chips left for the cookies." The kitchen filled with warmth as they worked together. Ethan approached the recipe like a business plan, measuring ingredients with precise attention to detail. Grace showed him how to cream the butter and sugar, her hands guiding his on the wooden spoon. "You're doing it too carefully," she teased. "Sometimes you need to just feel it." Max contributed by making an impressive mess, flour dusting his dark hair like snow. When it came time to add the eggs, he insisted on cracking them himself. "Careful, buddy," Ethan warned, hovering nearby. "Maybe I should crack." The eggs split perfectly into the bowl, and Max beamed with pride. "See? I'm a professional." "That you are," Ethan agreed, ruffling Max's hair and sending flour clouds into the air. They worked in comfortable chaos, with Grace teaching them her grandmother's secret trick of adding a pinch of cinnamon to the dough. When it came time to form the cookies, Max showed Ethan how to roll the perfect ball of dough. "Not too big," Max instructed seriously, "or they get all weird and flat, like pancakes. And we're making cookies, not pancakes." Ethan concentrated on his task, his tongue sticking out slightly as he shaped each cookie with the same precision he used for million-dollar contracts. Grace watched them, her heart warming at the sight of Ethan's usually perfect hair, slightly mussed, a streak of flour on his cheek. The first batch came out of the oven, golden brown and perfect. Max couldn't wait for them to cool, dancing from foot to foot as Grace arranged them on the cooling rack. "Can we taste them now? Please, please, please." "They're too hot," Grace warned, but Ethan was already reaching for one. "A true taste tester fears nothing," he declared solemnly, breaking the cookie in half. Steam rose from the center, chocolate still melted and gooey. He took a careful bite, and his eyes widened. "This is incredible." "See?" Max crowed. "We're amazing bakers. You're the cookie champion, Ethan." The title made Ethan laugh, a deep, genuine sound that filled the kitchen. "Cookie champion? I think that honor belongs to your mom." "Nope." Max shook his head firmly. "You made the roundest cookies. They're perfect circles. Moms are always kind of wonky." "Wonky?" Grace gasped in mock offense. "I'll show you wonky." She grabbed a pinch of flour and flicked it at Max, who squealed and ducked behind Ethan. "Protect me, Cookie Champion, Ethan stood tall, playing along. As Cookie Champion, I declare a cease-fire. All parties must share cookies in peace. They ended up sitting around the small kitchen table, dunking warm cookies in cold milk. Max had chocolate smeared on his chin, and even Ethan had abandoned his usual pristine appearance, his rolled-up sleeves dusted with flour. "Time for bed, mister," Grace announced when she noticed Max's eyes getting heavy. "School tomorrow." "But Mom." "No buts. Say goodnight to Ethan." Max wrapped his arms around Ethan's waist in a tight hug. "Night, Cookie Champion. You'll come back soon, right?" "Of course," Ethan promised softly, patting Max's back. As Grace led Max upstairs, Ethan began cleaning up the kitchen, falling into the comfortable rhythm of domestic tasks. He heard footsteps on the stairs, and Max's voice drifting down. "Mom, can Ethan come over tomorrow too?" Ethan smiled to himself, wiping down the counter. A rattling sound from upstairs caught his attention. Max's dresser drawer had been sticking lately. He remembered the boy mentioning it during their baking session. Making his way quietly upstairs, he found Max's room. The boy was already in bed, Grace sitting beside him reading a story. Ethan slipped in silently, kneeling by the dresser. Using careful, gentle movements, he examined the drawer's track, finding the loose screw that was causing the problem. Grace's voice continued the bedtime story, but he could feel her watching as he fixed the drawer, testing it to make sure it opened smoothly. When he finished, he turned to find Grace looking at him with an expression that made his heart skip. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet comfort of Max's bedroom, with the scent of cookies still lingering in the air and the sound of cricket songs drifting through the window, something shifted. Grace's eyes met his, and he saw in them the recognition of what he'd been trying to prove all along. That he wasn't just passing through their lives. He belonged here, in this home, with them. Chapter 21. A Setback of Fear. Chapter 20. Family Moments. Scene 2. The kitchen counters were dusted with flour, and 3 sets of cookie-covered baking sheets cooled on every available surface. Max had finally worn himself out and dozed on the living room couch, chocolate smeared at the corner of his mouth. Through the window, crickets chirped their evening song as darkness settled over Willow Creek. Grace wiped down the counter with slow, deliberate movements. She could feel Ethan's presence behind her as he finished loading the dishwasher, something she never thought she'd see a billionaire do. The domesticity of the moment made her heart ache. "You're good with him," Grace said softly, not turning around. "Better than I expected." "He makes it easy," Ethan replied, closing the dishwasher with a quiet click. "Max is special." Grace's hand stilled on the counter. "That's what worries me." "What do you mean?" She turned then, leaning against the counter and crossing her arms. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He's already so attached to you, the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon." Ethan stepped closer, but Grace held up a hand to stop him. "No, please. I need to say this." He nodded, staying where he was. "Do you know what it's like?" Grace's voice trembled. "To watch your child create stories about a father who abandoned him? To see him build castles in the air only to have them crash down?" She glanced toward the living room where Max slept peacefully. "Before you came, he used to tell his friends his daddy was an astronaut, then a secret agent, then a superhero. Anything to fill that emptiness." Ethan's face softened with understanding. "Grace. And now, here you are," she continued, "being everything he's ever dreamed of. You're kind to him. You listen. You remember his favorite colors and foods. You fix his dresser drawers without being asked." She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "But what happens when the novelty wears off? When the challenge of winning us over is done? When your company needs you back in New York?" "That won't happen," Ethan said firmly. "You can't know that." Grace's voice cracked. "Everyone has good intentions at first. Max's father promised me the world too. But when things got real, when it wasn't just fun and games anymore, he vanished." She pushed away from the counter, pacing the small kitchen. "And he was just a regular guy. You run an empire, Ethan. You have board meetings and shareholders and private jets. Your world is so far from ours." "I sold half the company," Ethan reminded her. "I'm here now. For how long?" Grace stopped pacing and faced him directly. What happens the first time Max has a tantrum? Or when he's sick and cranky at 3 a.m.? Or when he needs help with math homework instead of just wanting to play catch? Tears spilled down her cheeks now. I can't risk his heart like that. He's everything to me. If you leave, Grace. Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. He took a step forward, and this time she didn't stop him. I know I can't prove the future to you, but I'm not the same man who landed here in that private jet. He gestured around the modest kitchen. Look at me. I'm standing in a kitchen I just helped clean, with flour on my shirt and cookie dough under my fingernails, and I've never been happier. Grace shook her head. Happiness fades. Reality sets in. You're right. Ethan surprised her by agreeing. Reality does set in, and my reality was empty before I met you and Max. I had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. He took another careful step closer. I'm terrified too, Grace. Terrified I'll mess this up. Terrified I don't know how to be what Max needs. Terrified you'll never fully trust me. But I'm more terrified of going back to who I was before. Grace's shoulders trembled. I want to believe you. Then believe this. Ethan said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. Not when things get hard. Not when the novelty wears off. Not when Max needs math help, or has a fever, or throws a fit in the grocery store. He reached out slowly and took her hand. Grace didn't pull away. I'm staying, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. I'm staying because that little boy in there showed me what it means to be part of something real. I'm staying because you taught me that life isn't about managing time, it's about living it. Grace looked down at their joined hands but didn't speak. The crickets chirped louder outside, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The moment stretched between them, full of fear and hope and possibility. I promise, Ethan whispered. I'm not going anywhere. Grace didn't reply, but she didn't walk away either. She stood there in her flour-dusted kitchen, holding the hand of a man who had turned his whole world upside down to be part of hers, letting the weight of his promise settle in the space between them. Chapter 22. The School Play. Chapter 22. The Piano Recital, Scene 1. The elementary school auditorium buzzed with excitement as parents filed in, armed with cameras and proud smiles. Ethan sat in the third row, his usual tailored suit replaced by casual khakis and a blue sweater that Grace had once mentioned brought out his eyes. His hands fidgeted with the program, creasing and uncreasing the corners. Stop worrying, Grace whispered, settling into the seat beside him. Max has been practicing for weeks. He'll do great. I know. Ethan smoothed the program for the 100th time. I just want everything to be perfect for him. Grace's eyes softened. That's what parents do. Worry, even when we don't need to. The word parents made Ethan's heart skip. These past few months, he'd helped Max practice piano almost every evening. What started as simple scales had grown into real music, punctuated by Max's determined concentration and occasional bursts of laughter when Ethan tried to demonstrate and failed miserably. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the audience. The music teacher, Mrs. Chen, stepped onto the stage in a flowing dress. Welcome everyone to our spring recital. Our students have worked very hard. Ethan barely heard the introduction. His eyes were fixed on the side of the stage where the students lined up. Max stood in his pressed white shirt and black pants, bouncing slightly on his toes. A nervous habit Ethan had come to recognize. 3 students performed before Max. A girl played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. A boy stumbled through Mary Had a Little Lamb, and another girl performed a simple Bach piece. Each received enthusiastic applause from the crowd of parents. Next, Mrs. Chen announced, Max Turner will perform Moonlight Dreams by Sarah Matthews. Ethan sat up straighter. He knew this piece by heart now. Had heard it floating through Grace's house countless times, sometimes perfect, sometimes stumbling, but always with Max's whole heart behind it. Max walked to the piano, his small frame straight and determined. He adjusted the bench, just like they'd practiced, placed his hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. The first notes filled the auditorium, clear and confident. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He remembered the day Max had mastered that opening sequence, how the boy had jumped up and down in excitement, demanding they call Grace at work to tell her. The melody flowed into the more challenging middle section. Max's brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers dancing across the keys just as they'd rehearsed. When he reached the tricky part, the part that had frustrated him to tears last week, he sailed through it perfectly. Ethan gripped the armrest, his heart swelling with pride. Beside him, Grace wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. The piece built to its crescendo, Max's small hands stretching to reach the complex chords, then gentled into the soft, dreamy ending. The final note hung in the air for a moment before the audience burst into applause. Ethan jumped to his feet, clapping harder than anyone else in the room. His chest felt like it might explode with joy and pride. Max stood and gave a small bow, just as Mrs. Chen had taught him. His eyes scanned the crowd until they found Ethan and Grace. The smile that spread across his face was brighter than any spotlight. As Max walked off stage, Ethan couldn't stop beaming. He barely registered the next few performances, his mind replaying every perfect note of Max's piece. Grace squeezed his hand, and he realized she was crying again, happy tears streaming down her face. When the recital ended, parents and children filled the auditorium with cheerful chaos. Ethan stood, scanning the crowd for Max. He spotted him weaving through the forest of legs, running full speed toward them. Max launched himself forward, and Ethan caught him in a tight hug, lifting him off the ground. The boy's arms wrapped around Ethan's neck, and he pressed his face close to whisper, "Daddy, did I do good?" Ethan's heart seemed to stop, then restart with a rush of emotion so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. He hugged Max tighter, one hand cradling the back of his head. This moment, this perfect, precious moment, made every boardroom battle and lonely night worth it. Chapter 23. A New Beginning. Chapter 23. Where It All Began. Scene 1. Autumn painted the lakeside in warm amber and russet hues. Crisp leaves crunched beneath their feet as Ethan, Grace, and Max walked along the familiar path where everything had changed just months ago. Max darted ahead, chasing a particularly colorful leaf that danced on the breeze. "Be careful near the water," Grace called out, a mother's instinct in her voice. "I know, Mom," Max shouted back, already focused on his next adventure. Ethan smiled, watching the boy who had somehow claimed a piece of his heart. The late afternoon sun sparkled on the lake's surface, reminding him of that first day when he'd watched Grace and Max skipping rocks. He'd been so different then, all sharp edges and cold efficiency. "Remember when you tried to skip rocks?" Grace asked, as if reading his thoughts. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "You were terrible." "I prefer to think of it as strategically unsuccessful," Ethan replied with mock dignity, making Grace laugh. The sound warmed him more than his jacket. They passed the old wooden bench where he'd first sat with his expensive coffee, trying to figure out what people did on vacation. Now he knew. They lived. They laughed. They connected. "You've changed so much," Grace said softly, slowing her pace. "When you first came here, you were like a statue in a suit." "A very expensive suit," Ethan corrected with a grin. "And now look at you." Grace gestured to his casual weekend wear, jeans and a comfortable sweater. "You're wearing clothes that actually have wrinkles." "The horror," he chuckled, but his eyes were serious as he looked at her. Being perfect was exhausting. Being real, that's different. They reached the spot where Max had first called him Daddy. The memory hung between them, sweet and complex. Grace stopped walking, turning to face the water. The wind lifted her hair slightly, and Ethan resisted the urge to brush it back from her face. "I was so angry when the media circus hit," Grace admitted. "I thought you were just like Max's father, another man who'd sweep in, make promises, and disappear when things got complicated." "I remember," Ethan said quietly. The pain of that door closing in his face still echoed. "But you proved me wrong." Grace's voice wavered slightly. "You didn't just come back with grand gestures or money. You came back and stayed. You showed up for PTA meetings and helped Mrs. Wilson paint her fence. You learned how to make Max's favorite sandwich exactly the way he likes it. No crusts, cut diagonally, with a smiley face drawn on the napkin," Ethan recited proudly. Grace turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You changed your whole life. Not because you had to, but because you wanted to." "I didn't change my whole life," Ethan corrected gently. "I finally started living it." A few feet away, Max was creating a small pile of perfect skipping stones, his tongue poking out in concentration as he examined each one carefully. The sight made both adults smile. "You know," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been so careful with my heart. So careful with Max's heart. I built walls to keep us safe, but—" She paused, gathering courage. "But you didn't try to break them down. You just showed us a door." The metaphor struck Ethan deeply. He'd spent his career breaking through barriers, hostile takeovers, aggressive strategies. But with Grace and Max, he'd learned patience. He'd learned that some things couldn't be rushed or forced. "I love our little boy," he said simply, meaning every word. "And I love you." Grace's breath caught. It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but it was the first time she was ready to hear it fully. She looked down at their hands, so close, but not touching. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and took his hand in hers. The gesture was small, but monumental. For the first time, Grace wasn't accepting his hand out of politeness or necessity. She was choosing to take it, choosing to trust, choosing him. Ethan's fingers curled around hers, warm and secure. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Max sort through his rock collection with scientific precision. "Mom, Dad," Max called out suddenly. "I found the perfect skipping stone. Want to see?" Before either could answer, Max's foot slipped slightly on the damp grass. Ethan instinctively stepped forward, but Max had already caught himself, laughing at his near stumble. Grace squeezed Ethan's hand, amused by his protective reaction. "You know, for someone who used to manage billion-dollar deals, you get awfully nervous about a little slip." "Billion-dollar deals never had my heart running around in light-up sneakers," Ethan replied. Max bounded over to them, proudly displaying his perfect stone. "Can we skip it together?" "Show your dad how it's done," Grace encouraged, using the word dad naturally, making Ethan's heart swell. Max grabbed Ethan's free hand, the one not holding Grace's, and pulled him toward the water's edge. "You have to flick your wrist just right," he explained, with all the seriousness of an 8-year-old expert. The stone skipped 5 times across the lake's surface before sinking. Max jumped with excitement, then suddenly announced, "I'm hungry. Can we go home for cookies?" "Race you home, Dad," Max shouted, taking off down the path. Grace laughed through her tears of joy as Ethan quickly kissed her forehead. Together, still holding hands, they chased after their son, their footsteps echoing with the sound of family, of belonging, of home. Chapter 24. The Family They Chose. Chapter 24. The Grand Opening. The autumn mornings sparkled with possibility, as crowds gathered around Willow Creek's newest addition, a sprawling playground filled with gleaming equipment. Colorful balloons danced in the breeze, and excited children pressed against the temporary barrier, eager to be first on the slides and swings. Ethan stood near the ribbon-draped entrance, tugging at his casual sweater's collar. Even after months in Willow Creek, he sometimes felt strange without his usual suit and tie. But when he glanced down at Max bouncing beside him, clutching safety scissors nearly as big as his hands, Ethan's discomfort melted away. "Is it time yet?" Max whispered loudly, making Grace laugh from Ethan's other side. "Almost, sweetie," she said, smoothing Max's unruly hair. "Mayor Thompson is almost done with his speech." The mayor, a jovial man with silver hair, stood at a small podium addressing the gathered townspeople. "And so, thanks to the Sterling Foundation's generous contribution, our children will have a safe and exciting place to play for generations to come." Applause rippled through the crowd. Ethan noticed several of his former employees among the faces, people who'd chosen to relocate to Willow Creek to help run the foundation. They'd traded Manhattan's glass towers for small-town life, and like him, they seemed happier for it. "And now," Mayor Thompson announced, "I'd like to invite Ethan Sterling and his family to cut the ribbon." Max's eyes went wide at the word family. He grabbed both Ethan and Grace's hands, pulling them forward. Grace squeezed Ethan's fingers, and he felt the simple gold band he'd given her last week press against his skin. They approached the ribbon together, Max practically vibrating with excitement. The oversized scissors proved unwieldy for his small hands, so Ethan knelt behind him, helping to guide them. "Ready?" Grace asked, her hand resting on Max's shoulder. "Ready," Max declared. Together, they cut through the red ribbon. Cheers erupted as it fluttered to the ground, and children surged forward onto the playground. Max looked up at Ethan, bouncing on his toes. "Can I go play too, Dad?" The words still made Ethan's heart skip. "Of course, buddy. Just be careful." Max shot off like a rocket, making a beeline for the tallest slide. Grace wrapped her arm around Ethan's waist, leaning into him as they watched their son join the happy chaos. "Remember when you first came to town?" she asked. "You looked so lost, sitting on that bench by the lake." Ethan chuckled. "I was lost. I just didn't know it yet." Throughout the morning they mingled with the townspeople. Ethan found himself drawn into conversations about future projects, a new library wing, renovations for the community center, scholarships for local students. But unlike his old business discussions, these talks were warm and genuine, peppered with personal stories and shared dreams. Grace worked the crowd too, but in her own way. She knew everyone's children by name, asked about recent illnesses and celebrations, offered to bring her famous lasagna to the next town potluck. Ethan marveled at how naturally she connected with people, something he was still learning to do. As the sun climbed higher, they set up a picnic lunch near the playground. Other families spread blankets nearby, creating a patchwork of shared meals and laughter. Max appeared periodically, grabbing sandwiches and juice boxes before dashing back to his new friends. "The monkey bars are awesome," he reported during one such visit, face flushed with excitement. "Jenny says I'm getting really good at them." "That's great, sweetheart," Grace said, brushing wood chips from his clothes. "Don't forget to rest sometimes, okay?" "Okay, Mom." And he was off again. Ethan watched him go, remembering how he used to spend his own Saturdays, locked in his office, phone pressed to his ear, missing life as it passed by his window. Now here he sat on a checkered blanket, sharing potato salad with neighbors, his shoes dusty from wood chips. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Grace asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about how different everything is," he replied. "A year ago, I wouldn't have believed any of this was possible." Grace reached over and straightened his collar, a gentle habit she'd developed. "Different good?" "Different perfect," he said, catching her hand and kissing her palm. As afternoon stretched toward evening, families began packing up their picnics. The playground slowly emptied, though excited chatter about tomorrow's adventures filled the air. Max's energy finally flagged, and he trudged back to their blanket, collapsing dramatically between his parents. "Best day ever," he mumbled, eyes already heavy. Grace stroked his hair as the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The new playground equipment cast long shadows across the ground, and a cool breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves. Max's breathing deepened as he drifted off to sleep, secure between them. Grace shifted closer to Ethan, their shoulders touching. The quiet moment felt sacred somehow, like a photograph being taken in their hearts. "You've changed so much," Grace said softly, careful not to wake Max. "When I first met you, you didn't know how to slow down, how to just be present in a moment." "I had a good teacher," Ethan replied, equally quiet. "Two of them, actually." Grace smiled, watching their sleeping son. She leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder and whispered, "You didn't just learn to play, Ethan. You learned to love." Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently, his heart finally, completely home. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Grace Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.